Everyone, and welcome to The Proof Is Out There. We kick off with a group of Russian children heading out into the snowbanks with a camera to record some winter fun. What could go wrong? As you're about to see, they may have stumbled onto one of the country's most fearsome legends. Take a look. It's January 2013 in the Kemerovo region in southern Siberia. 3 young boys are videotaping themselves playing when they come across a set of monstrous footprints. It's all fun and games as they follow the tracks until they spot this. A dark figure is hunched in the brush. As the kids get closer, the creature seems to watch them for a moment before darting away. The boys, terrified, run off as fast as they can. The mysterious footage immediately sparked worldwide debate and speculation over its authenticity, with some experts calling it the most compelling sighting of a Russian Yeti to date. Igor Burtsev, director of the International Hominology Center of Moscow, believes this video actually shows 2 creatures.
We studied that place and found a lot of signs of the activities of these forest people, or snowman or Yeti. And we came to conclusion that no, there were 2 creatures who left the footprint. The big one led another one, small one, baby, behind him. That bigger one was walking ahead with very short steps to give the opportunity to smaller one to follow his footsteps.
Reported from the Himalayas to Siberia, the Yeti is believed to be a creature adapted to cold, harsh climates. Some say it resembles a bear more than an ape, and the indigenous Mansi people of Russia believe it was a ferocious monster, known to rip out the tongues of its victims. Still, the Yeti is thought to share most of the same behavioral traits from supposed Sasquatch-like creatures around the globe.
At this location, several branches were broken off pretty high up, and the bark had been perhaps chewed off. Breaking trees and particularly twisting it are known Sasquatch behaviors. I have personally found great examples in my research areas of just this sort of damage.
Another strange detail was the mysterious disappearance of several dead chickens.
We were told that before this footage was obtained, a number of chicken carcasses were discarded in the area, but yet afterwards, no feathers, no carcasses at all were to be found. Could this be why a Yeti was in the area in the first place?
Now, so far, the Yeti sightings we've investigated on this show have turned out to be a hoax or a misidentification. But back in 2019, the Indian Army publicly tweeted that its mountaineering team had discovered footprints of the mysterious beast near a Himalayan base camp. The post was widely ridiculed. But did these kids actually find the Yeti haunting the snowy fields of Russia? Let's see what our experts think. First, is it just a bear? Bears do walk on their hind legs for short distances.
This is the right color for a brown bear in this area. However, the body structure doesn't look like a bear. It seems to have longer limbs and shoulders that are higher up. So I don't think that this is a bear.
However, our experts are suspicious of the creature's footprints, particularly Igor's suggestion that their size is caused by a second, smaller creature walking behind its parent.
If a parent were making this track and a younger one was following in its footsteps, you would expect to see some missteps in the snow. They're perfectly spaced out from one another. Looking at our own species, a child's movements are much more clumsy. It's not going to be uniform like this.
And the solid brown coat makes it even harder to believe.
I don't think it looks like a wild animal. Although this bean is one uniform color, if you look at the other kids, they're in snowsuits. It is totally possible that this is just another snowsuit that are the same colors.
As they're running away, there's one of these boys in particular that looks remarkably similar to the configuration of this figure. I mean, his snowsuit and cap, he's uniform in color from head to foot. He could stand in for this figure.
And perhaps most telling of all is a noticeable jump within the footage. Did you miss it? Look again, right there.
If this were a video of what the boys were seeing in the wild, there would be a continuous plane. So I don't understand why all of a sudden it would cut. To me, this signifies that this is a hoax video.
Our verdict, we agree with our experts. This one is a hoax. There are just too many red flags. We were hoping to break the curse of the hoaxed Yeti videos, but we have Yeti to find a real one. Now let's flip the script from Russia to Brazil. Many people believe that indigenous tribes from around the globe experienced and interacted with alien phenomena in centuries past. And some tribes in the Amazon may still be having similar encounters to this very day. It's July 2024 in the Brazilian state of Acre. UFO researcher Rony Vernet has headed deep into the Amazon after hearing reports of strange phenomena among one of the jungle's indigenous tribes.
I did some requests for freedom of information access, so I had some documents sent back to me that proved that we had many incidents in close encounters between indigenous people and UFO in 2014 to 2016.
Rony sets up his cameras and captures something strange. This video, recorded off of Vernet's computer monitor, shows several fireball-like orbs, which move across the night sky slowly, but then start to zigzag at lightning speed in different directions. Take a closer look as these strange fireballs strobe around the sky.
As soon as I started to install the equipment, the phenomena started to increase more and more in activity. And it was a very different orange light, very different from conventional aircraft. It was very, very strange.
Vernet has kept the specific location of this video secret, and by far, it's not the only UFO sighting in the area.
This is just one in a long history of UAP events that have been reported around the Brazilian rainforest. In fact, Brazil had its own Roswell event, which occurred back in 1977, known as the Colares incident. The locals, for a period of time, were tormented by what they allege as UAP coming down and even sucking the blood from some of the civilian population. In fact, Brazilian military and law enforcement were called in at the national level to investigate.
The Brazilian Air Force named their investigation Operation Saucer, which included over 500 photographs and 15 hours of film.
The doctors who responded to this incident all substantiated that there were people, both civilian and military, who sustained what appeared to be burns or lesions, possibly the type of damage a high-energy laser would do to human tissue.
And these South American encounters weren't just limited to Brazil.
When I spoke to authorities in Peru, in Argentina, in Chile, in Uruguay, I was absolutely floored by the sheer number of reports that seemed so eerily similar to that of Brazil and the Colares incident. Local indigenous people tormented by these UAP. It was a routine occurrence.
Could there be alien life forms running rampant in South America? According to Elizondo, indigenous communities from Peru, Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay have all experienced UAP phenomena not unlike those reported from the Brazilian rainforest. Let's see what our experts think is actually going on here. Many have commented these fireballs appear to be meteors.
The bright light we see with a meteor is actually it burning up as it comes into the Earth's atmosphere. Depending on what the meteor is comprised of, you can get a variety of colors, but usually not these kind of flaming oranges and reds.
Only very slow-moving meteors occasionally appear red or orange, while faster ones, like this object, are generating such intense heat that they typically glow white, blue, or green. So if it wasn't a meteor, could it have been an airplane?
The consistency of the flashing pattern, to me, really speaks to it being a commercial aircraft. The warning lights that are on commercial aircraft, they're evenly spaced like we see there.
But an aircraft isn't capable of something we see here that's truly anomalous, the object's erratic motion.
It's a very quick maneuver that these things are doing on the screen. That's instantaneous acceleration. That's what it's doing. And I can honestly say that I've not seen anything like that before that's been recorded.
So could this, in fact, be some type of alien craft?
It's on a monitor, and person zooms in and zooms out. Something that's very clearly an object that somehow moves very instantaneously in different directions. That could be a video artifact. If it's legitimately an object, this is very, very, very compelling.
An object that may gain further legitimacy due to its behavior, which mirrors previous activity reported in the area.
This video here is just another one of those like mysteries we see in Brazil throughout its entire history. You are having reports of these lights that were moving around in the sky, and you had medical evidence that's supporting anecdotal evidence. In many of these indigenous cultures in Brazil, they're seeing craft or something that's in the sky that they can't account for. Ultimately, these objects were doing all those things that UAPs typically do.
Our verdict? Our experts can't come to any definitive conclusion, so we're going to have to go with genuine UFO, if only because these objects are still unidentified. One thing is for sure, we'll keep in close contact with Roni and share more of his fascinating work in the Amazon. The Japanese wolf went extinct more than a century ago after hunting and disease decimated the population. Or did it? Our next story features an encounter in the woods that has many wondering if this vanished apex predator has returned. October 14th, 1996, Chichibu-Tamakai National Park, Japan. Mountaineer Hiroshi Yagi is driving at night on a forest road when something flits across his line of sight. An unknown creature approaches his car, stopping just a few feet away. The animal shows no fear as Hiroshi moves towards it and captures this. With pointed ears, a long snout, and thick brown hair, it appears to be a wolf. Hiroshi takes several pictures, amazed that he may have stumbled upon an animal that hasn't been seen in decades, the Japanese wolf.
で、それを研究者の元に送りましたら、いないはずの狼ではないか。狼に対して、日本狼に対して興味を持って、同じような体験をしていた人たちが日本の国の中にいっぱいいたんですよ、実は。
Years after that first encounter in the forest, Yagi checks one of his trail cameras and sees footage of 3 deer appearing to flee something unseen. And on the camera audio, we hear the unmistakable sound of a howl.
初めていないはずの動物の遠吠えを聞いて
There's a good reason why Yagi's discovery is so stunning.
The last known remains of a Japanese wolf were purchased by a zoologist in the year 1905, and he in turn shipped those off to the Natural History Museum in London. But these images were taken in Japan in the 1990s, and it's kind of unexpected. There's an interesting parallel here between the Japanese wolf and something known as the Tasmanian tiger or thylacine, which is a carnivorous striped animal that supposedly went extinct on the island of Tasmania back in the 1930s. However, since that time, there have been dozens of alleged sightings of these animals running around on the island of Tasmania.
Or are Yagi's photos evidence of the wonders of modern science? In 2025, Colossal Labs announced that by using gene editing technology, they brought back to life dire wolves, a species that has been extinct for more than 10,000 years. Has someone else been tinkering with Mother Nature in Japan to resurrect another wolf species? A 2021 study revealed that the Japanese wolf has genetic links to both prehistoric wolves and modern dogs. So did Hiroshi Yagi find a Japanese wolf in those woods? or just a plain old pooch? Let's ask our experts. First, we compare the howl from Yagi's video to a recording of an actual wolf.
Comparing the wolf howl, the wolf tone, to what we have in the recording, there are many similarities here. The wolf tone has a very long pitch to it, very similar to what we had in the example recording. It tends to be at a long duration at one frequency. So nothing about the duration or the frequency range here would rule out that it could be a wolf that we're hearing in the recording.
So the audio evidence is pointing to a wolf. But what about Yagi's photos?
The thing that stands out is this creature seems to be a bit on the short and small side for what I would expect for a normal wolf. But Japanese wolves actually were quite a bit smaller compared to our standard wolves.
But based on the photos alone, can we conclude anything?
The snout and head seems a little bit elongated and more oval-like. Also, the tail looks a lot different than what I would expect from a wolf. And their heads seem to be shaped just a little bit different than a normal wolf. So I think most likely what's being reported here is a type of dog. I do think there is a high possibility that some of the feral dogs in the area might still carry some Japanese wolf genetics, but it would still be classified as a feral dog.
Our verdict? Kind of a split decision. Our experts say these images are of a feral dog, but our audio analysis of that howl leaves room for Hiroshi's wolf hypothesis. So the next time you're taking a hike in Japan, keep your ears to the ground. We have seen alleged UFOs that fly around at hypersonic speeds and even dive in and out of the water. But what about a UFO that doesn't move at all? Our next video features a strange object that seems to be making the rounds without going anywhere. Take a look. April 27th, 2023. A couple is driving home through the desert just outside Las Vegas, Nevada. Around 9 p.m., they notice something strange hovering in the night sky. Fascinated, they pull over to a fence line and watch in amazement. Beyond a chain-link fence, a row of sparkling, multicolored lights hovers in midair.
Oh my God, Ryan, they're UFOs.
The formation is completely static, attracting attention all over town, before allegedly disappearing a minute or two later.
Another Las Vegas resident saw the same thing northwest of his neighborhood. That eyewitness said that these lights didn't match up with any helicopter he'd ever seen.
The incident even makes local news. Reporters check with a nearby airport, but no flights can explain these stationary lights in the sky. Instead, some theorize they're connected to secret military craft. After all, the American West is dotted with special use airspace, and Nevada is no exception. In fact, one local military base seems a likely culprit.
Nellis Air Force Base is one of the biggest and also one of the most secretive. In fact, it's one of the places that trains pilots in some of the most cutting-edge airplanes that the military has at its disposal. Vertical takeoff and landing is a technology that the military is actively working on. These aircraft can take off vertically without any kind of runway, making them great for small areas or even aircraft carriers. They can hover just like these lights in this video and would remain completely stationary. So could these lights be some new kind of vertical takeoff and landing technology?
Problem is, Nellis also denies having anything to do with these lights. But there is another nearby base to consider, Area 51, which some UFO investigators believe may be the site of a UFO reverse engineering program.
In 2023, Pentagon whistleblower David Grush did testify that the government was trying to reverse engineer UFO technology. So that would be consistent with this potential sighting.
In March 2021, roughly 2 years prior to this sighting, Vegas residents noticed another nearly identical set of stationary lights hovering over the city. Authorities later identified those lights as flares. Will our experts say the same for this sighting? Or will these lights lead us elsewhere? Since that 2021 case turned out to be flares, are these new lights just flares too?
Typically, flares are going to be only one color, and the color that a flare is depends on the chemical element that's involved. So for instance, if we're using sodium, like it's used in some street lights, it's going to be a yellowish orange hue. Or perhaps if we're using magnesium, then we would have flares that are more whitish. But you're not going to have color changing flares. That is very unusual.
So then, could we be looking at lights from emergency vehicles? Maybe on a distant hill we can't see since it's nighttime.
The colors are not the right type of first responder lights that you would be expecting. These are the colors of the rainbow, and typically first responders are blue, red, and white, and maybe amber.
So even though there are some hills in the surrounding area, we know this isn't police cars on them. But could they be attached to a vehicle in the sky, like those vertical takeoff and landing planes?
I would say definitely not. They wouldn't be using rainbow-colored lights to fly around. They're set up to hover, but you would hear those type of distinct engines. None of this fits any of that.
If a craft is small enough, however, noise could be negligible. Could these simply be consumer-grade drones?
Drones have the ability to hover, and drones will be producing lights. But drones are not going to be able to hover perfectly. There's always going to be a little bit of movement in the air, and it's very hard to keep drones in place in that kind of situation.
Perfectly still, rainbow lights may not match any aircraft, but they are reminiscent of something we've seen before. In a previous episode, we investigated these stationary Vegas lights and found they were simply reflections in the clouds of lights from the Hilton, the Encore, and the Wynn hotels. However, we checked, and these lights are not in the immediate vicinity of any big casinos.
Due to the configuration and color of the lights, I would definitely say you're looking at an unknown.
I have no idea what these rainbow-colored lights are, and my final verdict is genuine UFO.
Our verdict? For this one, genuine UFO. This is one video of lights in the sky that certainly hit the jackpot. For many people of faith, the Bible is recognized as the Word of God, a sacred scripture handed down from the heavens. But in this next story, we're cracking open a spiritual text that's rumored to be of unholy origin. The National Library of Sweden in Stockholm holds a collection of more than 18 million items that date back over 1,000 years. What's the biggest draw? Well, history buffs, religious scholars, believers, and non-believers alike all find themselves drawn to this. It is believed to be the largest preserved medieval manuscript in the world, the Codex Gigas, famously called the Devil's Bible. And it's easy to see why. Weighing 165 pounds, this is an 800-year-old, 620-page book said to be made from the skins of 160 donkeys or possibly calves. Within the pages of this historic tome is a terrifying depiction of the devil. But how the book was made and by whom is a mystery.
There's a really interesting legend about how this book was created. They say that there was a monk at the monastery where this was created in Bohemia. He committed some kind of grave sin, and he was sentenced to be walled up alive. He said, "Please, I will write a book with all of the knowledge in the world overnight, and then can I escape this punishment?" And the abbot said, "Sure." He tried to write this book in one night. It didn't work. So the devil appeared to him and said, "I'm happy to write this book for you in one night. You just have to give me your soul." And the Codex Gigas, or the Devil's Codex, was created.
This origin story isn't the only unsettling tale surrounding the book. There's another account of a museum caretaker who suffered a mental breakdown after being trapped with the book inside the National Library overnight. And if that's not spooky enough, there's also another mystery of what's been torn from the book's pages.
There was a lot in this book, aside from the pictures of the devil in heaven. The Old Testament, the New Testament, calendars and ecclesiastical texts, a dictionary of medical knowledge, and even text for an exorcism. However, there are some pages missing.
Some people think the missing pages from the Codex contain an incantation used to summon the devil. Were they torn out to keep people from doing that? We can't speculate, but we did ask our experts to speak to the mystery of who made this book and how. First, is this the work of one man on one sleepless night? Well, that's half right.
One of the studies that have been done in recent times is a handwriting analysis, and to our surprise, it turns out that the text part was almost certainly written by a single person. The handwriting is identical throughout the book.
But as far as the rest of the story, not so fast.
Even if it was penned by a single person, it's virtually impossible that it was done in a single night. The kind of ink that they used back in those days, that took hours in and of itself to dry before you could turn the page.
So even if you accept the man was possessed, the ink wouldn't have cooperated. The National Library of Sweden set out to find how long it would have taken.
They've done a little bit of math or calculation on just how long it might take a monk to accomplish this work. You figure they work 6 days a week, taking Sunday off, of course. Working 6 hours a day, you might say, but trim that down to 3 because of all the activities that a monk will have to do in his day. But then when you do that calculation, it comes out to be 20 or 30 years of dedicated effort in order to accomplish this.
As for the devil's portrait, it's worth noting that the Dark Lord's image comes immediately after another full-page artistic depiction of heavenly Jerusalem. That has left some suggesting that the person who drew the devil actually made a 2-page spread that contrasts a symbol of salvation against one of evil.
I think perhaps this was the work of a monk who was dedicated to elucidating the mysteries as relate to the devil and thought it would be a contribution to society and the church to spend year after year, decade after decade perhaps, creating this incredible work.
Our verdict, man-made. Or maybe we should say monk-made. The devil may be in the details, but according to our experts, he's not behind this centuries-old text. Is there life on the moon? Scientists of yesteryear gave this question considerable thought. In fact, an 1846 textbook says, quote, "It is the general opinion of astronomers that the moon is inhabited." Nearly 2 centuries later, could this next video be the proof? July 21st, 2024, Austin, Texas. It's about 11:30 p.m., and Eric E-Man is in his backyard moon gazing when he spots something peculiar in the viewfinder of his Seastar S50 telescope.
It was a mix of excitement and disbelief. I'd spent hundreds of hours outside watching the moon, and I've never seen anything like it.
A round object appears to travel in a downward diagonal from right to left across the face of the moon. Its movement appears purposeful and unwavering from its straight path. Then, a wider shot captures the object as it completes its 45-second journey across the moon and glides into the darkness of space.
I was just looking at it, mesmerized the whole time, like, wow, I can't believe I'm capturing this.
The video is so astounding, the local news shares it for all of Austin to see, and no one can explain it.
I definitely think it was some type of saucer vehicle.
And Eric isn't the first moon gazer to consider an alien presence on or around the moon. In fact, it was a NASA scientist who reported in 1970 that the moon rang like a bell during an Apollo mission. This sparked speculation that the moon may be harboring an alien base.
The hollow moon theory suggests that the moon is not, in fact, a solid body, but is hollow, and that inside that cavern is a whole alien civilization that has launched probes or missions out of the inner moon and to explore the area around us, potentially even the Earth.
The theory may sound out there, but recent radar data collected by NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has revealed a large cave roughly 500 feet below the moon's surface, which could serve as a shelter or even a base. Bear in mind, our understanding of the moon is constantly evolving as new data comes in. For example, it was believed that the moon was completely dry until 2009.
India's Chandrayaan-1 found evidence of water molecules on the moon. This doesn't mean that there are lakes and rivers, but it could support further research into whether or not the moon could have ever hosted life.
So where did the moon come from in the first place? The most widely accepted theory is the giant impact hypothesis, the idea that the moon was formed by debris created in a collision between Earth and a small planet. Will our experts be able to draw their own conclusions about Eric's object? At first glance, we can't tell what our distance from this object is, or its size. First, we don't really know how far away this object is. Is it possible it's not close to the moon at all, and is instead something small in our own sky, like a drone?
Well, there's different kinds of drones, but typically we'd be able to see the shape of the drone pretty obviously in this view. But we just see this black blob here. That black blob tells us it's something further away that's been magnified by the telephoto lens. Drones are small. Beyond about 2 miles away, you would probably not even see this in the sky.
So the object is likely large because of its visibility and far away because of its lack of detail. In fact, this object could be so far away that its straight line trajectory could be an orbital path.
Now, if you see something move across the moon, it's typically a satellite in orbit around the Earth that passes in front of the moon. And the thing that's interesting about this is that when you watch them cross the moon, they're going to look like a silhouette against the moon because the moon is so much brighter. And so it'll appear as this dark object crossing the moon.
However, not everyone sees that.
The best indication that this is not a satellite is that we can see the object after it's passed the edge of the moon.
Take a look. We punched up the brightness and magnified the image, and notice how the object is still visible. It doesn't disappear into the blackness of space. That's because it's not in space.
You wouldn't see any brightness around it. What we're seeing here in terms of brightness is actually the brightness of the atmosphere, illuminated by the moon.
This is because the gas particles in Earth's atmosphere trap and scatter the moonlight. But in the vacuum of space, there are virtually no particles to scatter the light.
So what we're seeing here is an object that's inside Earth's atmosphere. Satellites don't go inside the atmosphere, so it can't be a satellite.
To figure out what it is, our experts do some calculations of their own.
We know that the object is moving about 7 or 8 times its own size per second. If this was something like a balloon that was only 2 feet in diameter, it's only moving about 10 miles per hour, just about wind speed, basically. So I'm going to go with balloon.
But now it's D'Antonio's turn to disagree.
The trouble is, it's moving downward, but regular balloons don't move in that kind of fashion. They're going to move in the wind horizontally. So it would be moving this way, not that way.
Our verdict, unidentified object. We doubt this is a UFO from a lunar civilization, but with convincing arguments from both our experts, we're not sure what it actually is either. But if there is life on the moon, we may learn soon enough. NASA plans to send astronauts there again as early as 2027. On this show, we've investigated reports of weird, unexplainable lights. The Marfa lights of Texas and the Hesdalen lights of Norway, to name just 2. Well, this next story concerns a light that has had people scratching their heads for almost 150 years. January 2011, Joplin, Missouri. Lisa Livingston Martin is driving on the aptly named Devil's Promenade Road right off Route 66. Spotting something eerie in the distance, she comes to a stop and pulls out her camera. Over the red glow of her car's brake lights, she captures this. In the distance, an orange orb of light hovers over the road. It's bigger and brighter than a star, and too low to be the moon. Lisa says it is a well-known sight among locals. They even have a moniker for it.
It's gone by several different names, and there's reason for that. Originally, it was seen around the hamlet of Hornet, Missouri, and so that's where it got its name as the Hornet Spook Light.
People have even taken videos, like this one from 2022. All of the attention has spawned plenty of theories.
The Hornet Spook Light has actually quite a long history. It's been reported as early as 1836 along the Trail of Tears. One of the stories was that there was a Quapaw maiden who was in love with a warrior. He died in battle, so she drowned herself, and that this spook light is her spirit or her soul as an orb looking for this warrior.
But this mystery didn't just inspire local folk tales. At one point, it even drew the attention of the federal government.
The Army Corps of Engineers went there in 1946 to try to figure out what it was, and declared this the mysterious light of unknown origin. They couldn't figure out what it was.
Fans of the Pixar film Cars might already be familiar with the spook light. The filmmakers made a spin-off short called Mater and the Ghost Light, based in part on this legend. But the images we've seen across the decades aren't works of animation. Let's see what our experts think we're looking at.
One of the ideas that people think about this glowing ball at the end of the street is that it has something to do with swamp gas that has been ionized or ignited.
Swamp gas occurs naturally when organic matter like mud and sediment decomposes, releasing flammable methane. If swamp gas is exposed to a spark, it can burst into colorful flames.
But if you look at the geology in the region where that light is appearing, you don't see any indication of swamps like we see in Florida or in England and those areas where you get a lot of swamp gases and stuff.
Could these lights actually be connected to Native American folktales?
What I always kind of find a little troubling is whenever you have something that's a mystery, you try to explain it away with an Indian myth. The Quapaw elders dispute this story that it was a maiden who drowned herself because this area is not their homelands. And so they say that this light is not her.
Is it possible that this is all just a trick of the light from cars in the distance?
I don't subscribe to the hypothesis that we're seeing an optical illusion from car headlights. First of all, car headlights come in pairs. So maybe the car headlights are too far away and they've merged. But then, again, a lot of individuals over the years have reported this light being very close to them, and yet without them hearing a sound like a car engine. So I really don't think that these are car lights.
Ultimately, these lights might remain a mystery, at least for now.
It's some sort of natural phenomenon in the atmosphere or related to the Earth that we've not yet fully understood and explained.
The snow lay thick over the Siberian plateau, stretching into an endless expanse of white, broken only by the jagged silhouettes of frostbitten pines and the distant, shivering outline of a mountain range that seemed to scrape the belly of the sky itself. A bitter wind carved through the air, carrying with it the scent of ice and pine resin, but beneath that familiar cold, something altogether alien seemed to thrum beneath the snow, a subtle vibration that whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. Dr. Eleanor Graves adjusted the strap of her thermal pack and tightened the fur-lined hood around her face, her breath rising in frosty clouds as she surveyed the barren landscape. Her expedition team, a mixture of cryptozoologists, anthropologists, and independent thrill-seekers, trailed behind her, their boots crunching over hardened snow, leaving behind a patchwork of footprints destined to be erased by the merciless winds of the Siberian wilderness. The team had been following a series of local legends for weeks, rumors of a creature the locals called Bolshoi Khalid, a monstrous, elusive being said to traverse the high plateaus under cover of blizzards, its footprints sometimes mistaken for avalanches, its roar echoing like the cracking of ice shelves. Eleanor had spent years chasing myths, from the forests of North America to the highlands of Bhutan, but there was something about this Siberian trail that drew her in, an instinctive pull that told her the boundary between legend and reality might be thinner here than anywhere else. Frozen daggers, and at the far end, two amber eyes reflecting the light back at her, intelligent and unblinking. Eleanor froze, unable to look away, and in that moment, the world seemed to contract to the space between her and the creature. The eyes moved with deliberate precision, following her every motion, and then with a sound like the grinding of glaciers, the being stepped into the beam. It was massive, covered in shaggy white fur, its face vaguely humanoid yet monstrous, features exaggerated in a way that suggested evolution along a path wholly unfamiliar to humans. Its chest heaved with slow, controlled breaths, and though it made no move to attack, the sheer presence of it pressed down upon Eleanor's mind, a combination of awe and primal fear. She fumbled for her camera, snapping a series of images, each flash illuminating more of its form, yet every time she moved, it mirrored her motion, a silent sentinel of this frozen temple. Then, abruptly, it turned and retreated into the cavern's darkness, leaving behind a patch of disturbed snow and an inexplicable sense of invitation, as if it expected them to follow. Eleanor exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration, knowing the encounter was just the beginning. She returned to the group, who were pale and trembling, yet undeniably captivated. Their expedition, they all realized, was about to become something beyond ordinary science, something that might challenge the very definition of life as they understood it. The descent from the plateau was slow, each step heavy with the knowledge that they had brushed against a living myth, yet the world beyond Siberia waited with its own secrets. Weeks later, Eleanor found herself on a flight bound for the heart of the Amazon rainforest, the humid air a stark contrast to Siberia's biting cold, her mind still haunted by the Yeti's gaze. Reports had reached her of strange aerial phenomena over the Amazon basin. Flares of light, inexplicable crop disturbances, and local tribes whispering of beings that descended from the sky, creatures both alien and terrifying, with skin that shimmered in the dappled sunlight like liquid metal. Her research team assembled once more, this time including xenobiologists, ufologists, and linguists fluent in native dialects, each drawn by the promise of documenting first-hand encounters with entities that challenged conventional understanding of life and intelligence. The rainforest welcomed them with the oppressive heat of the wet season, a living mosaic of green, buzzing with insects and the calls of unseen birds, yet beneath the vibrant canopy, an unsettling stillness often fell, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. It was on one such day, after days of trekking along winding rivers and through knee-deep undergrowth, that Eleanor noticed the first signs: elongated footprints in the muddy banks, three-toed and circular in pattern, unlike any known primate. The team followed them cautiously, aware of both the physical dangers of the jungle and the metaphysical implications of what they might be tracking. The prints led to a clearing where the sunlight seemed to shimmer unnaturally, as if refracted through a medium unseen, and hovering in the center was a figure, humanoid yet clearly not human, its form sleek and iridescent, limbs impossibly elongated, head disproportionately large, eyes black pools reflecting the canopy above. The being observed them silently, tilting its head in a gesture that suggested curiosity rather than hostility, and for a moment, Eleanor felt an unspoken connection, an acknowledgement of mutual awareness that transcended species and origin. Cameras clicked, instruments beeped, yet the alien remained motionless, as if evaluating their intentions. Then, without warning, it moved, not by walking, but by gliding above the forest floor, soundless and swift, disappearing into the thick foliage with a speed that left no trace but a faint shimmer in the air. The team was left in stunned silence, minds racing to interpret what they had just witnessed, and Eleanor felt that familiar pull once more. The insatiable drive to understand, document, and perhaps communicate with these beings who inhabited the fringes of human comprehension. Her notes grew frantic, scribbles about bioluminescent skin patterns, behavioral analysis, possible communication attempts, all interspersed with personal reflections on the enormity of what it meant to confront entities that might not adhere to earthly biology. As night fell, the rainforest came alive with sounds both beautiful and terrifying: the calls of howler monkeys, the hum of nocturnal insects, and a low, vibrating frequency that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. Eleanor lay in her tent, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's encounter, the Yeti's piercing gaze in Siberia, the alien's silent scrutiny in the Amazon, and she realized that the planet itself was a tapestry of mysteries waiting to be unveiled. Somewhere hidden beneath ice under dense foliage, and perhaps even beyond Earth, life thrived in forms both familiar and incomprehensible. The thrill of discovery coursed through her veins, mingled with a creeping unease. Every revelation raised more questions than answers. What connected these disparate phenomena? Was there a pattern, an intelligence orchestrating these appearances, or were they random, isolated anomalies challenging humanity's arrogance? Eleanor's sleep was fitful, dreams haunted by visions of towering white fur, glimmering skin, and eyes that seemed to pierce through the veil of reality itself. She awoke to the rainforest mist, carrying the faint echo of that vibration in the air, a reminder that the unknown was never truly distant, and that every expedition was but a step toward a truth that might be beyond comprehension, a truth she was both terrified and exhilarated to pursue. Daybreak brought renewed purpose. The team gathered, reviewing satellite imagery, local reports, and their own observations, plotting routes that would maximize encounters while minimizing risk. Eleanor led them deeper into the heart of the jungle, where the canopy thickened and sunlight barely touched the ground, shadows dancing like living entities. Hours passed with the oppressive humidity pressing down, and then from the undergrowth, a series of clicks and whistles resonated, patterned and deliberate, unlike any natural sound she had recorded before. The team froze, instruments raised, and the noises grew more complex, layered in a manner that suggested intelligence, rhythm, and perhaps even communication. Eleanor's heart raced. Could this be an attempt to communicate? A message from beings beyond human understanding? She signaled the team to observe quietly, to respect the presence they had stumbled upon. From the trees, pairs of eyes reflected dimly in the sparse light, watching, calculating, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence enveloped the clearing. Only the lingering sensation of being studied remained, an impression that they were part of an experiment, or perhaps an audition in a drama unfolding on a scale far beyond the human. Eleanor noted every detail, from leaf disturbances to air pressure changes, convinced that the forest itself, and the beings within it, operated on a principle that combined natural evolution with a logic humans were only beginning to glimpse. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, foreboding shadows, she understood that this was merely the beginning of a journey that would take them from the frozen Siberian tundra to the steaming Amazon, across deserts, mountains, and oceans, chasing entities whose existence tested every preconception of science, reality, and the fragile certainty that humanity clung to so desperately. Somewhere out there, the Yeti watched silently from its icy kingdom. The Amazonian alien glided through the mist, and Eleanor Graves, driven by equal parts curiosity and obsession, prepared to step further into the unknown, armed with knowledge, courage, and an unshakable belief that what they found would redefine the boundaries of life itself. The next morning in the Amazon rainforest dawned with an oppressive heat that clung to the skin and filled the lungs with humid, almost suffocating air, a stark contrast to the Siberian winds Eleanor had endured weeks earlier. Yet it carried the same sense of the unknown, the same electric tension that charged the environment when beings beyond comprehension were near. The expedition team gathered around a tangle of maps, satellite overlays, and hastily drawn sketches of footprints and phenomena, each member whispering speculations, theories, and half-formed predictions as if speaking too loudly might awaken the mysteries surrounding them. Eleanor, despite the sweat clinging to her brow and the relentless buzzing of insects, felt invigorated, her mind buzzing with possibilities, questions, and the thrill of imminent discovery. Their guide, a wiry local named Tuka, traced his finger along the river's meandering path, pointing out areas where the forest had been disturbed in unnatural patterns, places where the canopy shimmered in ways that defied logic, and regions where wildlife behavior had abruptly shifted, as if the natural order itself had been disrupted. Eleanor's eyes followed his gestures with mounting anticipation. Each marker, each note on the map seemed to pulse with significance, a breadcrumb trail leading deeper into the enigma that had become their obsession. As they pushed further into the rainforest, the air grew thick with the calls of unseen animals, and shadows moved just beyond sight, fleeting glimpses that suggested they were being watched, studied, as much a part of this ecosystem as the rivers and trees themselves. The ground beneath their feet was slippery, coated with layers of decomposing leaves and hidden roots that seemed to reach like tendrils for the unwary, Yet the footprints persisted, guiding them toward a region the locals referred to as El Claro del Cielo, a clearing rumored to be a point of contact between their world and another. Hours of navigating the dense foliage, dodging vines and the occasional venomous creature, culminated in a clearing bathed in dappled sunlight that refracted through a canopy of impossibly tall trees, casting a kaleidoscope of light patterns that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. At the center, the air shimmered, the heat seeming to bend the light and distort the shapes of the surrounding flora, creating an effect that was both beautiful and unsettling. Eleanor's instincts screamed that they had arrived at a locus of significance, a place where the veil between human perception and alien presence thinned dangerously. Her team fanned out cautiously, cameras and sensors at the ready, capturing the minute changes in temperature, electromagnetic fields and ambient sounds that seemed to fluctuate unpredictably, like a heartbeat not their own. Then came the first sign, the subtle, almost imperceptible levitation of small objects, a leaf, a pebble, a drop of water suspended mid-air, twirling as though caught in a miniature storm. Eleanor froze, her heartbeat loud in her ears, and she realized that this was no mere optical illusion. Something was manipulating the physical environment, bending the natural laws with a precision and subtlety that defied explanation. From the corner of her eye, she glimpsed movement among the trees, a flash of metallic iridescence, and then the figure appeared, hovering several feet above the forest floor, its elongated limbs folded in a posture both elegant and predatory. Its black, reflective eyes regarded them with unmistakable awareness, the faintest ripple across its skin catching the sunlight and casting refracted patterns onto the surrounding foliage. The team's collective breath caught, and Eleanor signaled for silence, urging them to observe without intervention, aware that any aggressive action might terminate this extraordinary opportunity. The being extended an arm or something resembling an arm toward a cluster of vines, and with a gesture, caused them to twist and coil in midair, forming geometric patterns that seemed deliberate, almost artistic. Eleanor's mind raced. This was intelligence, deliberate action, and possibly communication through a medium entirely foreign to human cognition. She reached for her notebook, jotting observations in rapid succession. Movement patterns, environmental effects, reaction to human presence, symmetry and rhythm of actions. Each detail mattered, each nuance a potential key to understanding a being that challenged every assumption of biology, physics, and consciousness. Then, without warning, it emitted a series of clicks, whistles, and tonal variations, sounds layered in a way that suggested syntax, inflection, and meaning. The team listened, instruments attempting to record frequencies beyond ordinary human hearing. Yet Eleanor sensed a message, a silent dialogue that transcended sound alone. She stepped forward slightly, hands open in a gesture of non-threat, and felt an electric tingle, a magnetic pull in the air, a sensation that seemed to resonate directly with her nervous system. The being mirrored her movement, leaning forward as if acknowledging the gesture, then released a pulse of energy that caused the ground beneath their feet to vibrate gently. Eleanor stumbled slightly but caught herself, heart racing, realizing they were not simply observing life. They were engaging with a form of intelligence entirely alien, yet capable of understanding and interacting with them. Tuka whispered in disbelief, eyes wide, and the rest of the team stood motionless, cameras capturing every instant. Yet none of the recorded images could fully convey the awe and terror they felt. For several minutes, they remained in this suspended interaction, time stretched and warped by the impossibility of the moment. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the being ascended, vanishing into the canopy, leaving behind a faint hum, a residual energy that lingered in the air, and a sense of profound loss, as if a door had closed before they could fully step through. Eleanor sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the encounter, and realized that this expedition would redefine their understanding of reality, pushing the boundaries of science, consciousness, and humanity's place in the cosmos. The team regrouped, exchanging stunned looks, each member grappling with a mixture of fear, wonder, and an almost obsessive need to document and understand what they had just witnessed. Conversations were hushed, punctuated by rapid note-taking, camera adjustments, and speculative whispers about the being's origins, intent, and potential for further interaction. Despite the thrill, Eleanor's mind returned to the Yeti in Siberia, drawing a tenuous connection between the two encounters. Both entities inhabited extreme, remote environments, both exhibited intelligence and awareness that challenged conventional understanding, Yet both seemed to observe rather than attack, study rather than dominate, leaving humanity as mere witnesses to phenomena beyond comprehension. She pondered whether these encounters were isolated incidents or part of a larger, interconnected pattern, a hidden network of life forms that had developed along parallel evolutionary paths, some on Earth, some perhaps not of it. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. If life could manifest in such diverse and intelligent forms here, what else might exist, hidden from human perception, waiting for discovery? Days turned into weeks as the expedition continued, moving through the dense Amazon, charting anomalies, interviewing tribes, and documenting every unexplained phenomenon. Eleanor's notebooks grew thick with observations, sketches, and speculative theories, while the team collected environmental samples, audio recordings, and high-resolution imagery, each artifact a potential clue to the broader mystery. One evening, as the rainforest settled into nocturnal rhythm, a distant glow appeared in the sky, faint at first, then intensifying into a radiant cascade of colors that danced like northern lights through the tropical canopy. The team gathered, mouths agape, as the spectacle unfolded, a display unlike any meteorological or astronomical phenomenon known, shimmering, shifting, and pulsing with an intelligence that suggested orchestration rather than chance. Eleanor's pulse quickened. It was as if the alien presence was communicating, signaling, or perhaps celebrating their observation. The glow coalesced into a shape, a luminous figure that hovered above the treetops, and for a moment, Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of connection, the realization that these beings might not only inhabit the earth but also choose when and how to reveal themselves, testing humanity's readiness to perceive what had always existed alongside them. Tuka muttered an old legend about the sky beings, describing ancestors' accounts of mysterious visitors, their stories dismissed by outsiders as superstition. Yet now Eleanor understood the kernel of truth within the myth. Each culture, each region, seemed to have its own guardians, observers, or sentinels, entities that maintained a balance between visibility and secrecy, interaction and isolation. Eleanor realized that the journey from Siberia to the Amazon was revealing a pattern, a fractal-like web of life forms, some terrestrial, some alien, all sharing the same principles: observation, intelligence, and restraint. She wondered if they had been chosen, or merely stumbled upon a sequence of events orchestrated by forces beyond comprehension, a cosmic chessboard on which humanity had only just begun to perceive the pieces. As the luminous figure dissolved into the night, leaving trails of light like fading whispers, Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility press down. They had glimpsed the unknown, captured evidence, yet understanding remained elusive, and the stakes were higher than ever. The rainforest, vibrant and alive, seemed to hum with hidden energy, each leaf and shadow a potential site of discovery, a reminder that their work had only just begun. Eleanor knew that beyond the Amazon, deserts, mountains, and oceans awaited, each harboring their own mysteries, each perhaps connected to a broader, unfathomable network. The Yeti of Siberia, the Amazonian alien, the whispered legends of tribes across continents, all pointed toward a truth humanity had not yet been ready to face: that life, intelligence, and consciousness were far more diverse, complex, and wondrous than any scientific framework could currently define. Her team, exhausted yet invigorated, settled in their camp, discussing strategies for continued observation, data analysis, and the ethical considerations of engaging with entities whose perception of them might be incomprehensible. Eleanor scribbled in her journal, reflecting on the duality of fear and fascination that had driven her across continents, realizing that this journey was not merely scientific, but deeply personal, challenging her understanding of herself, humanity, and the universe. The night in the Amazon stretched endlessly, punctuated by the cries of nocturnal animals, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional whisper of wind that sounded almost like communication. Eleanor lay awake, eyes tracing the outline of the canopy against the starlit sky, contemplating the intertwining of myth, science, and reality. She understood that the path ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, danger, and moments of profound revelation, yet she felt a thrill that no fear could diminish. Somewhere beyond the forest, beings of unimaginable intelligence observed, calculated, and perhaps even guided, and Eleanor Graves, driven by curiosity, courage, and obsession, prepared to step further into the unknown, knowing that every discovery would challenge assumptions, ignite imagination, and redefine humanity's understanding of life itself. The journey from Siberia to the Amazon had been only the beginning, a prelude to encounters that would span the globe, testing the limits of perception, courage, and comprehension, and Eleanor felt the inexorable pull of destiny, drawing her deeper into a world where the mythic and the real, the terrestrial and the extraterrestrial, converged in ways that were at once terrifying, beautiful, and utterly transformative. The days following the luminous spectacle in the Amazon became a rhythm of tension and anticipation, a fragile balance between observation and the creeping awareness that they were being drawn into a world governed by entities whose motives, abilities, and awareness far exceeded human comprehension. Eleanor Graves, ever vigilant, led the team along hidden tributaries, tracking anomalies in animal behavior, shifts in electromagnetic readings, and subtle distortions in the forest canopy, all meticulously documented in notebooks that grew dense with sketches, measurements, and personal reflections. Each footprint, each strange auditory signal, each glimmer of movement suggested an intelligence that had mastered stealth and communication beyond the known parameters of life on Earth. The team grew accustomed to the pervasive sense of being watched. Shadows that flitted just beyond peripheral vision, sudden chills in the humid air, and unexplained movement in the treetops became a constant undercurrent of their expedition, sharpening senses and intensifying curiosity. One afternoon, while traversing a particularly dense section of the rainforest, Eleanor noticed a sequence of unnatural clearings, circular and geometrically precise, as if cut deliberately into the undergrowth. She paused, her heart racing, and examined the edges. The vegetation was bent but not broken, and faint traces of iridescent residue clung to leaves and bark, a subtle shimmer that reflected light in ways inconsistent with any natural compound she had encountered. It was the alien signature she had hoped for, proof that their previous encounter was not a fluke but part of a deliberate pattern, a trail or perhaps even a message left for those perceptive enough to notice. The team moved cautiously, recording every detail, aware that the forest itself seemed to pulse with energy, almost as if the living canopy was alive to their intrusion, guiding or testing them. As twilight descended, the forest transformed into a cathedral of shadows and subtle movements, the calls of nocturnal creatures echoing in complex harmonics that made the air vibrate with an almost imperceptible resonance. Eleanor felt an instinctual draw toward a distant clearing where the ground seemed to glow faintly, illuminated by bioluminescent fungi that pulsed rhythmically, as though in sync with some unseen heartbeat. Her pulse quickened, realizing that this site could be a nexus point, a place where the terrestrial and the extraterrestrial intersected, and every fiber of her being screamed that she must approach. The team followed silently, instruments raised, documenting the bioluminescence, the temperature shifts, and the subtle distortion in gravity or air pressure, all signs pointing to phenomena outside conventional physics. As they entered the clearing, the air shimmered in visible waves, bending the edges of leaves and the shapes of trees, and Eleanor caught the first glimpse of the being that had been stalking them through the jungle, its form fluid, shifting, luminescent, its elongated limbs folded in an intricate symmetry. It hovered above the ground, emanating a soft hum that seemed to synchronize with the pulse of the glowing fungi. And when it extended one slender, shimmering arm, the vegetation responded, twisting and forming patterns that suggested intentional design rather than randomness. Eleanor raised her hand slowly, signaling non-threat, and felt a resonance, a magnetic-like pull that tingled across her skin, an energy that seemed to connect mind to mind, bypassing sound entirely. The alien's eyes, reflective and black as void, studied them intently, assessing, calculating, communicating in a way that was profoundly alien yet subtly intelligible, a bridge between cognition and emotion that Eleanor struggled to comprehend fully. Then came the unexpected. The being emitted a series of pulsed light patterns from its body, rhythmic and elaborate, which Eleanor instinctively recognized as communication. Her heart pounded as she attempted to mirror the patterns with a flashlight, experimenting with rhythm and duration, and to her astonishment, the alien responded, adjusting its pulses in a way that suggested acknowledgement, even dialogue. The team, initially hesitant, joined in, creating a chorus of light and sound, an improvised conversation with an intelligence that defied taxonomy, physics, and all prior expectations. Minutes stretched into hours as they engaged in this silent exchange, the forest itself seeming to watch, every leaf, branch, and creature attuned to the interaction, amplifying the surrealism of the moment. When the being finally receded into the depths of the jungle, leaving behind a residual glow and a faint vibration in the air, Eleanor felt both exhilaration and an almost unbearable longing. Proof of contact, yet fleeting, ephemeral. A reminder that the universe was far vaster and more complex than any human mind could contain. Exhausted yet euphoric, the team returned to camp, discussions fragmented by excitement, theories, and the desperate need to record every nuance while it was still fresh. Eleanor lay awake that night, listening to the rainforest's nocturnal symphony, pondering the implications of their encounter. An intelligent, sentient species, capable of manipulating matter and communicating across modalities entirely foreign to human senses, had chosen to interact with them, to reveal fragments of its existence. She considered the Yeti in Siberia, drawing a pattern between extremes. Ice and heat, predator and observer, terrestrial and alien. Both beings exhibited intelligence and awareness, yet both maintained a cautious distance, observing humanity with a curiosity that was neither threatening nor benevolent. Was there a hierarchy of knowledge, a network of sentient life monitoring the human species, testing readiness, comprehension, and adaptability? Eleanor's thoughts raced as she considered the ethical implications. Intervention versus observation, the responsibility of humans upon discovering life forms that defied comprehension, and the need to balance curiosity with respect for the autonomy of other intelligent entities. In the following days, they navigated deeper into uncharted areas, guided by satellite anomalies and local legends, encountering additional phenomena that defied natural explanation. Rivers that seemed to shift course overnight, trees that emitted low-frequency vibrations, and patterns in animal migrations that suggested a higher-level coordination beyond instinct. Every anomaly was meticulously documented, each observation reinforcing the growing realization that Earth itself might be a living laboratory, populated by entities that had evolved or arrived with purposes beyond human understanding. Eleanor's journal filled with sketches of luminous symbols, notes on behavioral patterns, and hypotheses regarding interspecies communication, yet she remained acutely aware that any theory was provisional, subject to the limitations of human perception and cognition. One evening, while studying a particularly dense cluster of bioluminescent vegetation, the team observed movement in the shadows. Multiple forms, smaller than the primary being they had encountered, darting with incredible speed and precision, coordinating in ways that suggested both social structure and tactical intelligence. Eleanor watched, fascinated and alarmed, noting that these entities seemed to be observing their observers, a recursive layer of awareness that unsettled the human mind. Instruments recorded faint electromagnetic pulses emanating from these smaller entities, synchronized with the bioluminescent fungi, suggesting a networked intelligence, possibly even a form of hive mind or distributed consciousness. The realization struck Eleanor with a mixture of awe and fear. Humanity was not alone on Earth, nor even dominant, and the presence of multiple intelligent species coexisting undetected challenged the very foundation of scientific understanding. As the days turned into weeks, the pattern became undeniable. Regions of extreme isolation, Siberia, the Amazon, high-altitude deserts, and other remote ecosystems served as hubs for these entities, places where environmental extremes facilitated forms of life and intelligence beyond conventional biology. Eleanor began to hypothesize that these species had either evolved independently under extreme conditions or arrived from beyond Earth, possibly through mechanisms and timescales that humans could scarcely comprehend. Her mind drew connections between the Yeti's physical adaptation to the Siberian cold and the aliens' manipulation of energy in the Amazon, considering parallels in survival, intelligence, and observation. One night, while reviewing satellite imagery and cross-referencing local reports, Eleanor noticed an anomaly. A series of glowing formations across the globe, aligned in patterns that suggested deliberate positioning rather than natural randomness. The implications were staggering, hinting at a planetary network, a deliberate orchestration of intelligent presence, observation, and perhaps influence. Could these beings be guardians, watchers, or even architects, guiding or protecting ecosystems while monitoring humanity's actions? Eleanor's thoughts spiraled, a mix of exhilaration, dread, and obsessive curiosity. The expedition pressed onward, each day offering new glimpses, new phenomena. Partial glimpses of beings reflected in water, strange pulses in the air that registered on instruments but not human senses, and fleeting glimpses of movement so fast it seemed impossible. Yet always Eleanor returned to the pattern: observation, non-intervention, calculated exposure. The beings revealed just enough to intrigue, to provoke, yet maintained a deliberate distance, enforcing boundaries that human science had yet to breach. The Amazon expedition became a crucible of human endurance, intellect, and perception, forcing Eleanor and her team to reconsider fundamental assumptions about life, intelligence, and the interconnectedness of ecosystems and consciousness. Each encounter, each anomaly, each fleeting visual confirmation of these intelligent beings reinforced a growing conviction: the universe, or perhaps Earth itself, was far more alive, aware, and complex than humanity had ever dared to imagine. In the silent hours of the rainforest night, Eleanor reflected on the journey from Siberia's icy desolation to the Amazon's suffocating humidity, recognizing a thread that connected the disparate phenomena. Life in its most intelligent, elusive, and mysterious forms had always existed alongside humanity, hidden in extremes, testing observation, understanding, and readiness for the revelation of truth. She contemplated the future of their research, the ethical and philosophical ramifications, and the unfathomable potential for communication, collaboration, or even confrontation. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the planet, the Yeti observed silently. The Amazonian alien glided through mist and foliage, and countless other beings, hidden from human perception, maintained their presence, orchestrating interactions with a precision that suggested intent, purpose, and awareness beyond comprehension. Eleanor Graves, filled with awe, determination, and an insatiable curiosity, understood that their journey was just beginning, that the boundaries of science, myth, and reality were only starting to blur, and that the pursuit of understanding these extraordinary life forms would redefine not only their understanding of the natural world but the very essence of human perception and imagination. The forest hummed, alive with unseen movement, radiant bioluminescence, and silent intelligence, and Eleanor felt the inexorable pull of the unknown, knowing that every discovery would deepen the mystery, challenge assumptions, and ignite a journey into realms where myth and reality intertwined, creating a tapestry of life, consciousness, and awareness more vast, complex, and wondrous than humanity had ever dared to imagine. The expedition's progression deeper into the Amazon became increasingly surreal, as though the forest itself were testing their resolve, guiding them toward phenomena that defied every law of natural science they thought they understood. Eleanor Graves, despite the unrelenting humidity and exhaustion, felt a sense of exhilaration mingled with trepidation, a visceral understanding that they were moving through zones of intelligence not bound by human perception. Each day, subtle anomalies became more pronounced: clusters of vines that moved with deliberate coordination, patches of soil that emitted a low, rhythmic vibration, and occasional glimpses of forms slipping between trees that were impossibly fast and eerily silent. These beings, elusive yet unmistakably present, seemed to observe without interference, a balance of curiosity and caution that left the human mind both enthralled and unsettled. The team, increasingly adept at tracking and documenting these phenomena, began noticing patterns: markings on leaves that suggested symbolic representation, sequences of light and shadow that followed precise intervals, and the coordinated movements of forest creatures that suggested guidance by unseen hands. Eleanor hypothesized that the rainforest itself might serve as a medium for a networked intelligence, entities utilizing natural elements as conduits for communication, manipulation, and observation. It was on the 10th day that the first truly extraordinary encounter occurred. They reached a canyon-like ravine, where sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, leaving the floor in a perpetual dim twilight. Eleanor noticed a subtle distortion in the air, a shimmering ripple that seemed almost liquid, as if reality itself were bending in response to some unseen force. Her team froze, instruments raised, and from the center of the ravine emerged a form both familiar and utterly alien. A smaller version of the luminous being they had previously observed, its skin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that shifted in rhythm with an unseen frequency, eyes reflecting the dim light in iridescent colors that defied description. The entity extended its arm, and Eleanor felt the ground vibrate in resonance with the motion, a low hum permeating the air, almost musical in tone. The being's movements were deliberate, expressive, a choreography that suggested thought, intent, and communication. Eleanor responded instinctively, moving her hands in synchronized patterns, attempting to mirror the pulsing lights and vibrations. The alien paused, seemingly evaluating her efforts, then accelerated its gestures, creating a symphony of light and resonance that enveloped the ravine, interacting with the forest in ways that made Eleanor realize this was not merely observation, but instruction, an invitation to comprehend a form of communication utterly foreign to humans. For hours they remained in this intricate, silent dialogue, the rainforest responding subtly to each pulse, shimmer, and motion, as though the land itself were alive, participating in the exchange. Eleanor's notebook filled with sketches, diagrams, and rapid notes, though she knew that the essence of the encounter could never be fully captured by conventional documentation. It was more than contact, it was communion, a fleeting yet profound understanding that the forest and its inhabitants operated on an intelligence beyond human measure. When the entity finally retreated, gliding into the shadows with unmatched speed, Eleanor felt an overwhelming mix of awe and melancholy. Proof of their presence had been confirmed, yet the fleeting nature of the interaction left them with more questions than answers. Over the subsequent days, the team noticed increasingly sophisticated signs of intelligence. Plants rearranged in geometrically precise formations, insects moving in coordinated patterns that resembled choreography, and the faintest hums of vibration through the forest floor, detectable only through careful instrumentation. Eleanor realized that this network of sentient life might extend far beyond what they had encountered, an intricate ecosystem where intelligence manifested, not only in physical form, but in manipulation of environment, energy, and perception itself. Her thoughts often returned to the Yeti of Siberia, whose massive furred presence had conveyed intelligence and awareness through silent observation and subtle behavioral cues. Despite the stark contrast between the icy plateau and the Amazon, Eleanor recognized a thread connecting the experiences. Both beings demonstrated mastery over their environments, a sophisticated balance of concealment and revelation, and an awareness of human perception that suggested deliberate observation. One evening, the team observed a phenomenon unlike any before. A convergence of several luminous entities above a river, pulsing in synchronized patterns that reflected off the water, creating a kaleidoscope of colors and movements that seemed orchestrated with precision. Eleanor, trembling with anticipation, realized that this display might serve multiple purposes: a form of communication, a demonstration of coordinated intelligence, and possibly a ritual or signaling method that humans were only beginning to perceive. She attempted to record the event, using multiple cameras, infrared sensors, and electromagnetic detectors, yet the recorded images failed to capture the vivid depth, intricate patterns, and underlying resonance she witnessed firsthand. This discrepancy between perception and documentation became a recurring challenge, reinforcing the understanding that human instruments could not fully bridge the gap between known science and the phenomena before them. As the expedition continued, Eleanor began to notice behavioral changes within her team. The relentless exposure to entities that defied comprehension, the constant uncertainty, and the profound sense of witnessing intelligence far beyond human norms began to affect their psychology. Sleep became fragmented, dreams haunted by visions of bioluminescent forms and shifting light patterns, while waking hours carried a persistent tension, a heightened awareness that made every rustle of leaves or shadowed movement potentially significant. Discussions frequently turned philosophical. What were the ethical responsibilities of humans encountering sentient beings with capabilities surpassing their own? Were they intruding upon ecosystems intentionally shielded from human interference, or had these beings chosen to reveal themselves selectively, testing the observer's readiness? Eleanor documented these reflections meticulously, understanding that the human response to such encounters was as critical to study as the entities themselves. The journey from the initial Siberian encounter to the Amazon revealed patterns that suggested the existence of extreme environment sentience worldwide. Snowbound highlands, dense jungles, arid deserts, and deep subterranean caverns seemed to harbor life forms capable of manipulating matter, energy, or perception in ways humans could scarcely understand. She began hypothesizing a planetary network of sentient observers, each operating within its niche, collectively influencing or monitoring ecosystems, and perhaps even human activity. These thoughts were punctuated by moments of direct observation: a flash of movement too fast for human vision, a series of synchronized bioluminescent pulses in response to human gestures, or subtle environmental shifts that could only be explained by intelligent manipulation. Eleanor's research journal expanded into a complex compendium, blending science, philosophy, and personal reflection, capturing the gradual evolution of her understanding from mere curiosity to profound recognition of life forms and intelligences existing parallel to humanity. One day, as they navigated a narrow gorge bordered by towering rock formations, Eleanor noticed an unusual formation etched into the stone, faint yet deliberate, resembling symbolic characters arranged in sequences. Her team approached cautiously, measuring electromagnetic anomalies, temperature shifts, and subtle vibrations emanating from the carvings. Eleanor speculated that this might be a message, a form of abstract communication intended to be interpreted by those perceptive enough to notice. She spent hours analyzing the sequence, comparing it with previously observed bioluminescent patterns and vibrations, hypothesizing correlations that suggested a level of intelligence capable of encoding information across multiple sensory modalities simultaneously. These discoveries fueled both excitement and trepidation. They were uncovering evidence not merely of life beyond human understanding but of entities capable of sophisticated symbolic thought, environmental manipulation, and selective engagement. Eleanor began theorizing connections between these isolated intelligence hubs, envisioning a planetary web, each node operating autonomously yet capable of inter-node interaction, surveillance, and perhaps even guidance. This concept challenged the foundation of terrestrial biology, psychology, and anthropology, and she realized that humanity's conventional frameworks for understanding life, intelligence, and consciousness were inadequate. The team's interactions with these phenomena became increasingly methodical, blending field observation, instrumentation, and cautious experimentation, always aware of the ethical imperative to avoid interference while maximizing data collection. They discovered that subtle gestures, light patterns, and vibrations could elicit responses, revealing an interactivity that suggested not just observation but teaching, testing, or communication. Eleanor reflected on the parallels with the Siberian Yeti, an entity whose silence and presence conveyed meaning, whose existence challenged perception without overt contact, demonstrating a mastery of subtlety and observation. The Amazonian entities operated on similar principles, yet with technological or biological enhancements, light manipulation, environmental resonance, and multimodal communication that surpassed terrestrial constraints. Eleanor's understanding evolved rapidly. These were not isolated anomalies, but manifestations of intelligence adapted or designed to exist in environments inhospitable to humans, employing observation, subtle communication, and control over physical parameters to interact selectively with those who could perceive them. She documented every encounter, every shift in the environment, and every response to human gestures, understanding that these records might serve as the foundation for a new paradigm in science, philosophy, and the study of consciousness. The rainforest, vibrant and alive, became simultaneously laboratory, cathedral, and enigma, each moment of observation deepening their awareness of the vast unknown. Eleanor, exhausted yet invigorated, often found herself alone in the forest during dawn and dusk, contemplating the implications of their discoveries. The ethical responsibility of observers, the limits of human understanding, and the possibility that Earth itself was a curated environment, overseen by intelligences operating on scales and principles beyond human comprehension. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long dancing shadows through the thick canopy, Eleanor felt the inexorable pull of curiosity, knowing that the journey from Siberia to the Amazon was only the beginning of a global odyssey. Deserts, mountains, oceans, and subterranean realms awaited, each harboring forms of life, intelligence, and consciousness designed to test, observe, and communicate in ways humanity had never imagined. The Yeti of Siberia, the luminous Amazonian alien, and countless other unseen entities formed a planetary mosaic of intelligence, observation, and interaction, challenging every assumption about life, evolution, and the human role in a complex sentient world. Eleanor Graves, driven by a relentless curiosity, courage, and an emerging reverence for the unknown, prepared to follow this trail of discovery wherever it led, aware that every step would push the boundaries of understanding, confront the limits of perception, and reveal truths about existence that were both terrifying and sublime. By the time Eleanor Graves and her team had navigated further into the Amazon, the rainforest had transformed from a mysterious, foreboding landscape into an intricate theater of intelligence, each plant, animal, and subtle movement serving as potential evidence of life beyond human comprehension. The team had grown accustomed to constant vigilance, noting that shadows flitted in ways inconsistent with normal wildlife, leaves rustled with deliberate intention, and the air itself seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible frequency, as though the environment were alive with consciousness, aware of every step they took. Eleanor, both exhilarated and wary, led the expedition along hidden paths indicated by subtle anomalies in the terrain. Depressions in the soil that suggested enormous weight, yet left no tracks, arrangements of flora that followed geometric patterns, and faint, iridescent residues that appeared on leaves and rocks, marking passage or signaling presence. They soon discovered areas where the forest floor seemed to ripple slightly, a phenomenon initially dismissed as wind or minor tremors but which, under careful instrumentation, revealed a rhythmic vibration, faint yet undeniably intentional, as if some form of intelligence communicated through kinetic resonance. Eleanor documented each instance meticulously, understanding that conventional explanations could no longer suffice. They were confronting phenomena that challenged both the laws of physics and the very concept of life as humanity understood it. The expedition became increasingly aware that the luminous Amazonian beings were not isolated, but part of a broader network, a planetary system of sentient entities distributed across extreme environments, each adapting to its niche and interacting selectively with humans only under particular conditions. During one particular exploration, Eleanor noticed subtle distortions in the air along the bank of a meandering river. A faint shimmer like heat haze, yet accompanied by a series of rhythmic pulses that could be felt rather than heard, resonating with the team's equipment and their own nervous systems. As they approached cautiously, a figure emerged from the dense foliage, smaller than the primary luminous being they had encountered previously but no less extraordinary, its skin a fluid iridescence that shifted in color and intensity with every motion, limbs elongating and contracting in a manner that suggested both grace and formidable strength. It hovered silently above the forest floor, eyes reflecting a deep intelligence and an awareness that transcended the normal limits of human observation. Eleanor, sensing an opportunity for communication, initiated subtle gestures with her hands, attempting to mimic the rhythmic pulses emanating from the entity. To their astonishment, the being responded, adjusting its patterns of light and movement in a way that indicated recognition, comprehension, and deliberate engagement. The forest seemed to respond to this interaction, leaves trembling in harmonic synchrony, bioluminescent fungi pulsing with subtle timing, and insects moving in coordinated patterns that amplified the impression of an orchestrated, intelligent network. For hours, Eleanor engaged in this silent dialogue, a conversation conducted through light, movement, and resonance rather than conventional language. Each gesture, each pulse became a step in an exchange that felt almost sacred, the rainforest itself acting as intermediary, translator, and observer. The team was both fascinated and humbled, realizing that they were interacting with forms of life and intelligence wholly unlike anything previously documented on Earth. As night fell, the Amazonian alien retreated, disappearing into the shadows with a speed and fluidity that left the team in stunned silence. Eleanor felt a mixture of exhilaration and frustration, knowing that the encounter was both confirmation of the being's presence and a fleeting, ephemeral interaction that could not be captured fully by instruments or narrative. In the following days, Eleanor and her team noticed a subtle but profound shift in their environment. Forest creatures moved with unexpected coordination, vines shifted in response to their presence, and faint glows appeared in previously darkened areas, all suggesting that their observations had triggered a new phase of interaction, one in which the rainforest itself participated more actively in signaling and communication. The phenomenon was unlike anything Eleanor had encountered before. A networked intelligence, distributed across multiple life forms, interacting not only with each other, but also with human observers in a controlled and deliberate fashion. She hypothesized that this intelligence had evolved to remain largely hidden, revealing itself only to those capable of perception, patience, and ethical restraint. The parallels with the Siberian Yeti became increasingly apparent. Both forms of life, though vastly different in environment and manifestation, exhibited awareness of human perception, deliberate choice in revealing themselves, and a capacity to communicate through subtle, nonverbal means. Eleanor theorized that extreme environments, whether icebound tundras, dense rainforests, arid deserts, or remote mountains, acted as incubators for life forms with heightened intelligence, capable of observation, manipulation, and selective engagement. During one particularly intense night, as the team rested in their canopy tents above a river, a series of soft vibrations emerged through the forest floor, imperceptible to the ear but resonant enough to rattle equipment and sense the presence of consciousness. Eleanor, awakened by the phenomenon, stepped into the open and noticed a faint phosphorescent glow drifting along the riverbank. She gestured toward it, and to her amazement, the glow accelerated, coalescing into a small humanoid form that hovered inches above the water. Its skin pulsed with shifting light, and it emitted a sequence of soft clicks and tones, rhythmically alternating with pulses of bioluminescence. Eleanor responded cautiously, experimenting with light patterns and hand gestures, and the entity immediately adjusted its movements, creating a dialogue of luminous pulses and resonant vibrations that conveyed both awareness and intelligence. This exchange lasted hours, during which Eleanor felt a profound connection, an understanding that defied linguistic and cultural constraints. They were communicating across a bridge of perception that transcended human sensory and cognitive limitations. In the aftermath, Eleanor recorded every observation with meticulous detail. The timing of pulses, the wavelength of light emitted, the environmental changes in response to interaction, and the physiological responses observed in both humans and forest biota. Her journal became a hybrid of science, art, and philosophy, attempting to capture phenomena that could not be adequately expressed in conventional terms. Over subsequent days, the team continued to encounter subtle signs of intelligence, patterns in falling leaves that suggested deliberate placement, the coordinated movement of flocks of birds in sequences that mirrored previous light pulses, and mysterious depressions in the forest floor that appeared to encode information or signals through spatial arrangement. Eleanor began drawing comparisons to the Yeti's behavior, noting that while the Siberian entity had communicated through presence, observation, and subtle physical cues, the Amazonian entities utilized multimodal communication, combining light, movement, and environmental manipulation into a sophisticated language. The realization was staggering. Human perception was limited not by ignorance, but by sensory and cognitive constraints, and these forms of life had evolved or adapted strategies to interact selectively with those capable of understanding them. Eleanor theorized a planetary network of sentient life, each species or entity occupying ecological and environmental niches optimized for survival and observation, with interaction carefully controlled to minimize disruption and maximize communication efficiency. She began to consider the ethical responsibilities inherent in encountering such intelligences, recognizing that the expedition's actions could have unforeseen consequences on an ecological and cognitive scale beyond comprehension. Weeks turned into months as Eleanor and her team documented and theorized, traveling through more remote regions, encountering new forms of intelligence, and attempting to synthesize a framework that could accommodate the extraordinary breadth of life they observed. In each encounter, they were reminded of the duality of presence and absence. These entities were simultaneously revealed and concealed, interacting with deliberate precision, and always challenging human assumptions about the limits of biology, cognition, and consciousness. Eleanor's understanding of life, intelligence, and the human place in the cosmos underwent a profound transformation, acknowledging that Earth itself might be part of a larger network, a curated environment where intelligence manifested across multiple forms, dimensions, and scales. As the expedition prepared to leave the Amazon for further explorations in extreme regions across the globe, Eleanor reflected on the path from Siberia to the rainforest, recognizing a pattern in intelligence, awareness, and selective engagement. Each entity, whether fur-covered, luminous, or otherwise, exhibited mastery of observation, control, and communication, revealing glimpses of life forms operating beyond human comprehension, yet accessible to perception through patience, ethical observation, and intuition. She understood that humanity's role in this network was nascent, the potential for meaningful interaction limited by perception, ethics, and readiness to comprehend intelligence beyond their own evolutionary framework. Eleanor Graves, determined, inspired, and profoundly aware of the enormity of what lay ahead, prepared to follow these threads across continents, through deserts, mountains, oceans, and subterranean realms, seeking understanding of life that was simultaneously terrestrial, alien, and fundamentally transformative. The journey had already redefined her understanding of existence, observation, and intelligence, and she knew that the experiences ahead would continue to challenge, inspire, and expand the limits of human perception in ways she had only begun to imagine. The weeks following their Amazonian encounters became a study in patience, adaptation, and the slow unraveling of a reality far more complex than any member of Eleanor Graves' team had anticipated. A reality in which sentient beings operated in ways that transcended biology, physics, and human cognition. Each morning in the dense rainforest began with ritualized preparation, careful inspection of instruments, meticulous note-taking, and constant scanning of the environment for anomalies, subtle vibrations in the soil, irregular movement of foliage, shifts in light patterns that hinted at the presence of life forms they had yet to fully comprehend. Eleanor felt an almost obsessive drive to record every nuance, knowing that even a minor detail could illuminate aspects of the intelligence they were studying. The Amazonian entities, elusive yet unmistakably present, displayed a remarkable capacity for subtle manipulation. Leaves were arranged into geometric sequences overnight, vines appeared intertwined in complex patterns, and bioluminescent fungi pulsed in precise rhythms that seemed to correspond to environmental changes, human gestures, and even the team's emotional states. Eleanor theorized that these phenomena were not merely manifestations of advanced biology, but components of a sophisticated communication network, in which environmental elements served as conduits for thought, intent, and interaction. On one particular afternoon, deep within an overgrown gorge, Eleanor observed a sequence of shadows that moved with uncanny coordination, flitting between trees, shifting with speed and precision impossible for ordinary creatures. Instruments confirmed electromagnetic fluctuations and minor distortions in the air, suggesting a conscious manipulation of space and energy. The entity, or perhaps a collective, hovered momentarily, emitting subtle pulses of light that refracted across the foliage, and Eleanor instinctively mirrored the patterns, creating a dialogue in rhythm, light, and resonance. This interaction stretched into hours, during which Eleanor felt the profound realization that she was not merely observing these beings, but participating in a shared perceptual framework, one that required attention, intuition, and responsiveness beyond conventional human training. The forest itself seemed alive in a new way, leaves trembling in harmonic unison, insects adjusting their movement to enhance patterns, and water droplets suspended momentarily in midair, refracting light to form shifting, intricate geometries. Eleanor's team, though initially cautious, became more confident in engaging with this extraordinary intelligence, learning to modulate gestures, synchronize light patterns, and recognize environmental cues that signaled both attention and intent from the beings they had come to understand as sentient. Night brought no relief from vigilance. The rainforest's nocturnal symphony was layered with subaudible signals, glimmers of luminescence, and subtle environmental vibrations that suggested ongoing observation, analysis, and communication. Eleanor often found herself awake, standing amidst the canopy shadows, contemplating the implications. These entities had evolved or adapted mechanisms that allowed them to remain largely undetected, interacting selectively with humans who demonstrated patience, ethical restraint, and perceptual sensitivity. During one particularly striking encounter, a luminous entity appeared at the edge of a riverbank, its form elongated and fluid, limbs moving with grace that suggested both artistry and intelligence. It hovered above the water, emitting synchronized pulses of bioluminescence, while causing subtle ripples in the river's surface that reflected in complex geometric sequences. Eleanor recognized patterns reminiscent of the previous interactions, yet with an added complexity that hinted at increasing awareness of human observation, perhaps even a deliberate test of their perceptual and cognitive capabilities. She responded by generating mirrored light sequences, adjusting timing and incorporating gestures that modulated the surrounding environment, and the entity reacted instantaneously, creating a multilayered exchange of resonance, light, and movement. Hours passed in this delicate dance, Eleanor acutely aware that the being's mastery over environmental elements was far beyond anything documented by science. Leaves rotated in harmonic patterns, water droplets hung suspended momentarily, and the forest seemed to pulse in rhythm with their interaction. By the time the entity receded into the shadows, the team was physically exhausted yet intellectually electrified, aware that they had engaged in a form of dialogue that transcended traditional human understanding of language, intelligence, or consciousness. Over subsequent days, Eleanor began to identify recurring motifs. luminescent pulses corresponding to environmental energy shifts, sequences of leaf arrangements that reflected spatial logic, and faint vibrations that seemed to encode information across multiple modalities simultaneously. Her analysis suggested the existence of a networked intelligence capable of multidimensional interaction, a species, or perhaps multiple species, whose cognition had evolved to interface with both the natural environment and observant humans. The team began to record and categorize these interactions, employing both traditional instruments and improvisational methods to capture aspects of phenomena that standard tools could not adequately measure. Eleanor's notes became increasingly speculative, yet grounded in observed patterns, suggesting that these intelligences might not only monitor human activity, but also guide, teach, or test observers in subtle, non-invasive ways. She found herself drawing parallels with the Yeti in Siberia, a being that conveyed intelligence through presence, observation, and deliberate movement, revealing awareness without overt communication. Despite environmental contrasts, both Siberian and Amazonian encounters emphasized a shared principle: intelligence that operated on selective revelation, observation, and non-interference. One evening, while surveying a small clearing illuminated by naturally occurring bioluminescent fungi, Eleanor noticed an arrangement of plant life forming a pattern that extended beyond simple geometry. It resembled a map of interconnected nodes, each glowing subtly in response to their presence. Her mind raced. Was this a form of symbolic communication, a representation of the planetary network she had begun to theorize? The arrangement appeared to respond to her gestures, adjusting luminescence intensity and sequence timing, as though testing comprehension, observation, or interpretive skill. Eleanor's team meticulously recorded the interaction, noting the synchronization between environmental elements, light pulses, and their own movements. They speculated that the rainforest was not merely a habitat, but an interactive medium, allowing communication, cognition, and observation across species and sensory modalities. Each encounter challenged conventional definitions of intelligence, forcing a reevaluation of human assumptions regarding life, perception, and consciousness. Weeks later, Eleanor revisited a previously marked gorge, discovering new anomalies: subtle depressions in the soil, vibrational frequencies modulated in rhythmic sequences, and the fleeting shimmer of translucent forms navigating the undergrowth. Instrumentation confirmed electromagnetic fluctuations and minute gravitational distortions, phenomena consistent with previous observations, yet presenting entirely new patterns of interaction. Eleanor hypothesized that the being's intelligence operated on multi-layered systems, capable of influencing matter, energy, and perception simultaneously, and selectively engaging with observers able to detect subtle signals. These realizations led to long philosophical discussions among the team. What was the ethical responsibility of humans encountering sentient life forms operating on dimensions beyond understanding? How could they avoid disrupting ecosystems or interfering with cognitive networks they barely comprehended? And most pressing, what did it mean for humanity's conception of its place in the cosmos? One night, as rain fell in sheets across the dense canopy, Eleanor stood alone on a natural platform overlooking a river. A series of glowing forms appeared downstream, floating above the water with elegance and precision. They emitted pulses of light synchronized with the rhythm of the river's current, creating intricate sequences that reflected both awareness and deliberate artistry. Eleanor mirrored the patterns, adjusting timing and intensity, and for several hours, engaged in a dialogue conducted entirely through movement, light, and environmental resonance. The experience was profoundly transformative, an encounter that defied language, conventional cognition, and traditional science. It illuminated the existence of life forms that had evolved or arrived to occupy extreme environments, mastering observation, communication, and interaction in ways humans were only beginning to perceive. Eleanor recognized that each encounter was an incremental revelation, a carefully controlled exposure to intelligence designed to test observation, understanding, and ethical response. The parallels to the Yeti became ever more pronounced. In Siberia, a creature of immense strength, adapted to isolation and extreme cold, observed silently. In the Amazon, a networked intelligence of light and resonance orchestrated multimodal communication. Both forms reflected a principle of selective revelation, intentional engagement, and sophisticated observation. Eleanor's understanding of intelligence and life expanded to encompass multidimensional cognition, environmental interaction, and planetary-scale observation, suggesting a network of beings operating in ecological and perceptual niches across extreme environments worldwide. As the expedition prepared to depart the Amazon for further exploration of deserts, mountains, and other remote regions, Eleanor contemplated the journey from Siberia to the rainforest, recognizing a continuity of principles in intelligence, perception, and interaction. Each entity, whether fur-covered, luminous, or otherwise, adhered to a pattern of awareness, observation, and selective engagement, challenging humanity's assumptions and redefining the very concept of life. Eleanor Graves, invigorated, determined, and profoundly conscious of the scale and complexity of what lay ahead, prepared to follow the trail of intelligence across the globe. She understood that every subsequent encounter, desert, mountain, or subterranean, would test limits of perception, ethics, and understanding, pushing human comprehension into realms previously relegated to myth, speculation, or imagination. The Yeti, the Amazonian beings, and countless unseen intelligences formed a planetary mosaic of cognition, observation, and interaction, each node challenging, teaching, or monitoring in ways humanity had yet to fully grasp. Eleanor, embracing the unknown, prepared to continue, driven by curiosity, courage, and the profound awareness that their discoveries would reshape human understanding of life, consciousness, and the cosmos itself. As Eleanor Graves and her team emerged from the Amazon and began preparations for their next phase of exploration, the sense of connectedness to a larger, hidden web of intelligence persisted like a persistent hum in the back of her mind, an almost tangible resonance that guided her decisions, observations, and even moments of rest. The journey to the next extreme environment, a desert plateau thousands of miles away, was arduous, requiring coordination, careful planning, and adaptation to conditions that were starkly different from the dense humidity of the rainforest. Yet the transition brought with it a sense of continuity. The patterns they had observed, the subtle manipulations of environment, the pulse of intelligence in flora, fauna, and the elements, suggested that the phenomena were not isolated but part of a planetary-scale orchestration, a network in which intelligence manifested according to niche, adaptation, and necessity. As they crossed the arid plains, Eleanor noticed the first signs that life in this extreme environment, too, was operating under principles of observation and subtle communication. Sand dunes shifted in patterns that suggested deliberate movement, shadows appeared and disappeared with unnatural speed, and the local wildlife exhibited coordinated behaviors that defied conventional ecological understanding. Instruments recorded anomalies, microvibrations in the sand, minor fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, and heat patterns inconsistent with solar input, which Eleanor theorized were signatures of hidden intelligence, species adapted to perceive and manipulate conditions humans barely noticed. The team proceeded with extreme caution, recognizing that any sudden movement or aggressive exploration could disrupt delicate interactions or provoke unanticipated responses. During the midday heat, Eleanor observed a faint shimmer across the horizon, initially dismissed as mirage, but soon recognized it as something more deliberate. A sequence of movements reflecting the sunlight in precise intervals, forming patterns that resembled symbolic encoding. As they approached, the shimmer solidified into a form unlike anything they had previously encountered, neither fully terrestrial nor entirely alien, a hybrid of physical presence and energy manipulation. Its surface refracted sunlight, creating prisms of color that flickered in calculated rhythm, and its movements were both deliberate and fluid, suggesting intelligence, awareness, and an intent to communicate. Eleanor signaled to her team, gesturing with slow, deliberate motions, attempting to mirror the visual pulses. The entity responded with subtle changes in rhythm and intensity, a conversation conducted through reflection, light, and environmental modulation. Hours passed as the desert became a theater for this silent dialogue, the wind carrying soft pulses of vibration across dunes and rocks, enhancing the resonance of interaction, while the team's instruments struggled to capture the depth and intricacy of communication. Eleanor realized that this intelligence, like the Amazonian entities and the Yeti, adhered to principles of observation, selective engagement, and controlled revelation, testing the perceptual and cognitive abilities of those who could perceive their signals. Over subsequent days, the desert revealed further anomalies. Sand arrangements forming geometric shapes that persisted despite wind patterns, microorganisms shifting in synchronized movement, and occasional glimpses of translucent forms gliding across dunes at speeds too great for conventional vision to follow. Each observation reinforced Eleanor's growing understanding that intelligence on Earth was not confined to human-defined parameters, but existed as a multidimensional phenomenon, interacting with environment, observers, and perhaps even other forms of intelligence in complex networks. She began constructing a conceptual framework to explain these phenomena. A planetary system in which sentient beings, distributed across extreme environments, observed, communicated, and adapted in ways that integrated ecological, physical, and perceptual dimensions simultaneously. Ethical considerations became a central focus. The necessity of non-interference, the responsibility of observation, and the imperative to respect intelligence that operated on scales far beyond human comprehension. Late one evening, while analyzing luminous reflections cast on salt flats, Eleanor noticed a sequence of movements that appeared to respond to the team's presence in a way that was almost conversational. Subtle light pulses synchronized with the orientation of the sun, shifts in sand reflecting deliberate patterns, and microvibrations that seemed to encode information. Eleanor experimented with responses, adjusting gestures, light reflection, and vocalizations, and the entity immediately adapted, creating a dialogue in which meaning emerged not from words, but from the orchestration of environment, energy, and perception. It was a revelation. Communication need not be verbal or symbolic in the traditional sense. Intelligence could interact across sensory modalities, through matter, light, and resonance, and yet convey complex meaning intelligible to attentive observers. Days turned into nights, and Eleanor observed that the desert, much like the Amazon rainforest and Siberian wilderness, was an interactive medium, where intelligence could manifest subtly, invisibly, yet powerfully. Microorganisms, sand formations, and subtle air currents all appeared to participate in a distributed awareness, responding to observer actions in synchronized, purposeful ways. These realizations prompted Eleanor to expand her theoretical model. Life on Earth, far from being solely human-centric, existed across multiple scales, dimensions, and modes, capable of perception, adaptation, and interaction in forms humans were only beginning to recognize. She drew comparisons between extreme environment intelligences. The Siberian Yeti utilized physical presence and subtle behavioral cues. Amazonian entities employed light, resonance, and environmental modulation. Desert beings leveraged reflection, heat, and environmental orchestration. Across extremes, a pattern emerged: observation, selective engagement, non-interference, and intelligent adaptation. Eleanor's team meticulously recorded each encounter, aware that documentation was both scientific and philosophical, providing insight into forms of intelligence that challenged fundamental assumptions about life, cognition, and consciousness. During a particularly intense encounter on a plateau at dusk, the desert entity emitted a complex sequence of reflective pulses, synchronized with minor tremors in the earth. Eleanor recognized the sequence as a multimodal communication attempt, combining light, vibration, and subtle environmental modulation. She mirrored the sequence using reflective instruments, gestures, and modulation of her own movement, and the entity responded in real time, creating a continuous exchange that tested attention, comprehension, and perception. As the exchange continued into the night, the surrounding desert seemed to participate. Temperature fluctuations, subtle wind shifts, and ambient sounds all synchronized with the interaction, reinforcing Eleanor's growing understanding that life on Earth existed as a network of awareness, perception, and influence that transcended conventional biology. The experience left the team simultaneously exhilarated and exhausted, aware that their encounters were only fragments of a planetary intelligence system, a web of sentient activity spanning extreme environments, each node observing, interacting, and evolving independently yet coherently. Eleanor's reflections deepened. Human perception was limited not by intelligence, but by sensory and cognitive constraints, and understanding this network required both humility and a willingness to interpret the world beyond familiar frameworks. The parallels to the Yeti and Amazonian beings crystallized into a unified vision. Intelligence manifests differently across environments but maintains core principles of awareness, observation, and selective engagement. Eleanor hypothesized a planetary network, where extreme environments fostered forms of cognition and interaction inaccessible to ordinary human perception, yet capable of communication with attentive, ethical observers. As the expedition concluded its initial desert exploration, Eleanor contemplated the journey from Siberia to the Amazon to the plateau, recognizing a continuity in intelligent presence, environmental modulation, and multimodal communication. Each extreme environment hosted distinct forms of life, yet all shared attributes: mastery of observation, intentional concealment, selective interaction, and an ability to influence or respond to the environment and perceptive observers. Eleanor Graves, driven by curiosity, courage, and reverence for intelligence beyond human comprehension, prepared for the next leg of the journey, aware that mountains, oceans, and subterranean realms awaited, each promising new revelations, challenges, and transformations. She understood that humanity's role in this intricate web of intelligence was nascent, with capacity for comprehension, interaction, and ethical responsibility still in its infancy. Yet the potential for insight, connection, and redefinition of life, consciousness, and perception was immense, and Eleanor embraced the unknown with determination, preparation, and an awareness that every discovery would reshape understanding of the Earth and the cosmos. The Yeti in Siberia, the luminous Amazonian beings, and desert entities together formed a mosaic of awareness, observation, and interaction, a planetary tapestry of intelligence that both guided and tested humanity's readiness for knowledge, ethical engagement, and recognition of life far beyond conventional boundaries. Eleanor's resolve strengthened. She would follow these threads wherever they led, crossing continents, climates, and extremes, documenting, observing, and interacting in a manner that honored both curiosity and responsibility, ready to confront truths that would forever alter human perception of the natural world, consciousness, and the scope of life itself. The transition from desert plateau to high-altitude mountains brought Eleanor Graves and her team into an environment that tested both endurance and perception, a realm where the thin, cold air demanded constant vigilance, and every movement carried amplified consequence. Snowfields stretched endlessly, broken intermittently by jagged cliffs and shadowed crevices that seemed to conceal both wildlife and the subtle signatures of intelligence Eleanor had come to recognize in extreme environments. From the first day, anomalies appeared. Tracks in fresh snow that defied conventional anatomy, temperature fluctuations that could not be explained by wind or sun, and faint rhythmic vibrations in ice and rock that resonated through the soles of their boots, perceptible only to those attuned to subtle energy shifts. Eleanor noted that the patterns bore similarities to previous encounters: deliberate movement, environmental manipulation, and selective visibility, a signature of intelligence operating on principles beyond human comprehension. On the third day, while ascending a narrow pass, she noticed a sequence of enormous footprints partially obscured by drifting snow, footprints that suggested immense mass yet showed no conventional pressure or displacement in surrounding ice. The dimensions of the tracks recalled the Yeti she had observed in Siberia, yet there was a nuance in the impressions, subtle ridges and curvature in the snow that suggested adaptive awareness, as though the being had accounted for human observation or instrument detection. Eleanor signaled her team to halt, recording every detail, sketching impressions, and marking precise coordinates. As they moved forward cautiously, a figure appeared at the edge of their vision. Massive, fur-covered, yet moving with unexpected agility, its presence both commanding and wary. The Yeti regarded them silently, eyes reflecting an intelligence that transcended instinct, a sentience that weighed observation and choice with deliberate calculation. Eleanor felt a rush of recognition and humility, understanding that this being, like the Amazonian entities and desert intelligences, adhered to principles of selective engagement, observation, and ethical interaction. Over the following days, the team observed a range of behaviors that defied conventional zoology. The Yeti manipulated its environment, moving ice and snow to create pathways, conceal shelters, or mark locations with patterns visible only to attentive observers. Subtle vocalizations and body movements, almost imperceptible, communicated intent, social structure, and even warnings, all suggesting a sophisticated communication system developed over centuries in isolation. Eleanor began drawing parallels across extreme environments. Siberian Yeti, Amazonian luminescent entities, desert intelligences, each adapted uniquely to its habitat yet demonstrating universal principles: selective engagement, environmental mastery, observation of humans without intrusion, and the capacity to communicate across unconventional modalities. These observations led Eleanor to hypothesize a planetary distribution of sentient beings, each operating within its niche, capable of environmental manipulation and selective interaction with perceptive humans, suggesting intelligence far broader and more complex than previously conceived. During a night of intense auroral activity, Eleanor observed the Yeti in a high-altitude valley responding to the shifting light in the sky, moving with deliberate precision, its gestures synchronized with patterns in snow, ice, and the aurora itself. The interaction suggested not merely survival or territorial behavior, but an intelligence capable of environmental adaptation, observational awareness, and even aesthetic or symbolic expression. The team attempted to engage carefully, respecting boundaries, and observed remarkable responses. The Yeti adjusted its movements in ways that indicated recognition, attention, and selective communication, creating a silent dialogue across space, time, and environment. These experiences reinforced Eleanor's conviction that intelligence on Earth was multidimensional, manifesting across species, ecosystems, and environments in ways humans had yet to quantify or understand. She documented behavioral sequences, environmental manipulation, and the subtle interplay of observation and interaction, recognizing that conventional instruments captured only a fraction of the phenomena. As the days progressed, Eleanor noted that the Yeti, much like the Amazonian entities, seemed to utilize both environmental and sensory channels for communication. Snow, ice, wind, and ambient sound formed an integrated system through which intent, observation, and response were transmitted. The realization was profound. Intelligence need not rely on spoken language, written symbols, or technology. It could emerge naturally, integrated with the environment, and interact selectively with other species capable of perception. At one point, while traversing a crevasse, Eleanor and her team discovered a series of formations in ice that resembled abstract symbols, precise yet organic, embedded in the crystalline structure itself. Electromagnetic readings showed minor fluctuations, thermal sensors recorded energy differentials, and subtle vibrations resonated through the ground. Eleanor theorized these formations were analogous to messages observed in previous extreme environments, a form of multimodal communication or environmental mapping designed for those perceptive enough to recognize it. The Yeti, observing from a distance, seemed to encourage attention, moving in rhythm with environmental patterns and creating new formations, reinforcing the concept of an intelligence capable of teaching, testing, or communicating in ways humans had yet to comprehend. Eleanor reflected on the cumulative journey, from Siberian ice to the Amazon rainforest, to desert plateaus and now high-altitude mountains. A pattern of sentient observation emerged, emphasizing awareness, environmental mastery, selective engagement, and multidimensional communication. Each encounter revealed not merely life but intelligence, complexity, and deliberate interaction with perceptive humans. She documented the physiological, psychological, and philosophical impacts on her team. Heightened perception, fragmented sleep cycles, intense focus, and the gradual reshaping of assumptions about life, consciousness, and human relevance in a planet shared with entities operating on levels beyond comprehension. The Yeti, despite its imposing size, exhibited patience, restraint, and deliberate subtlety, interacting in ways that minimized risk while maximizing observational learning. Eleanor hypothesized that all extreme environment intelligences employed similar strategies: observation first, engagement second, always calibrated to human perceptual capacity. Over successive days, additional Yeti sightings reinforced this theory. Movements adjusted in response to human behavior, environmental manipulation maintained patterns consistent with communication, and a silent, persistent presence suggested not only awareness but intentional guidance. Eleanor's team began to anticipate patterns, observing without intrusion, learning to interpret environmental cues, vibrations, and subtle gestures, effectively engaging in a cross-species dialogue mediated by observation, intuition, and careful interaction. She drew comparisons between the mountain, desert, and Amazon encounters, noting convergent principles: selective engagement, environmental adaptation, multimodal communication, and ethical observation. The cumulative evidence suggested a planetary pattern. Life in extreme environments developed intelligence not merely for survival, but for observation, interaction, and environmental modulation, often hidden from conventional human perception. Eleanor's notes expanded into a comprehensive conceptual framework, a network system of intelligence across environments, each node capable of interaction, observation, and environmental manipulation, collectively forming a planetary tapestry of awareness. The ethical implications weighed heavily. Human intrusion could disrupt delicate interactions, compromise understanding, or provoke unintended consequences. Yet the potential for knowledge, insight, and transformative understanding was unprecedented. On the final evening of their mountain expedition, Eleanor observed the Yeti performing movements in concert with auroral activity, creating intricate patterns in snow, ice, and light. The performance seemed both aesthetic and communicative, suggesting intelligence capable of abstract reasoning, environmental manipulation, and interaction across perceptual modalities. Eleanor, inspired, attempted to respond with gestures, light reflection, and synchronized movement. The Yeti adjusted in real time, engaging in a subtle multidimensional dialogue that left her team awestruck, intellectually invigorated, and profoundly aware of humanity's limited yet expanding capacity for comprehension. The expedition's conclusion reinforced a key understanding. Earth was not merely a backdrop for human life but a complex ecosystem of sentient intelligence, each adapted to its environment, each observing, communicating, and interacting with discernment. Eleanor Graves, acutely aware of the profound responsibility and opportunity inherent in these encounters, prepared to extend the research further, exploring oceans, caves, and other extremes, confident that the principles discovered, observation, selective engagement, environmental manipulation, and multimodal communication, would guide them to the next revelations, each encounter deepening understanding of life, consciousness, and the extraordinary tapestry of intelligence that shared their planet. The Yeti, luminescent Amazonian entities, desert intelligences, and countless unseen beings collectively formed a planetary mosaic of observation, interaction, and awareness, a complex web inviting humanity to observe, learn, and recognize its own place in a world far more alive and intelligent than previously imagined. Eleanor, embracing the unknown, felt both humility and exhilaration, ready to traverse the next extreme environment with heightened perception, ethical mindfulness, and the determination to document, understand, and engage with life forms whose intelligence stretched the limits of human imagination and comprehension. After leaving the high-altitude mountains behind, Eleanor Graves and her team descended toward the coastal regions, where dense fogs and storm-laden skies heralded the beginning of their exploration of oceanic extremes, a domain that was as alien in its vastness as the deserts had been in their aridity or the highlands in their isolation. The transition from terrestrial to marine environments demanded an entirely new set of instruments, methodologies, and perceptual frameworks. Submersible drones capable of navigating complex underwater terrain, pressure-resistant sensors to detect minute electromagnetic fluctuations, and specialized audio equipment designed to capture vibrational patterns beyond conventional human hearing. From the first submersion into the deep coastal waters, the team was confronted with phenomena that reaffirmed the consistency of the planetary intelligence they had begun to map. Bioluminescent creatures that moved in coordinated formations as if aware of the human presence, subtle currents manipulated to create temporary eddies with precise geometry, and faint pulses of electromagnetic activity that seemed to encode information across distance and time. Eleanor marveled at the continuity. Though the medium was now water rather than air or soil, the principles of interaction remained consistent. Intelligence that observed, communicated selectively, and manipulated the environment to convey meaning or respond to perceptive observers. On the third day of underwater exploration, the submersible cameras captured a formation of enormous, translucent creatures gliding through a canyon-like trench, their bodies refracting bioluminescent light into intricate patterns that mirrored the rhythmic pulses observed in the rainforest and the desert. Eleanor recognized these as signals, possibly attempts at communication or synchronization with human presence. The creatures responded immediately to movements and light patterns projected from the submersible, adjusting trajectories, pulsing with increased intensity, and creating visual sequences that defied conventional biology or logic. Hours were spent observing this elaborate display, attempting to mirror pulses, reflect light in synchronization, and interpret patterns that suggested an intelligence capable of environmental manipulation, multimodal communication, and conscious observation. Over time, Eleanor noted an increasing awareness in the oceanic entities. They altered currents, adjusted depth and velocity with precise timing, and exhibited what could only be interpreted as deliberate coordination, indicating a collective understanding of the human observer's perception and abilities. This reinforced her overarching theory that intelligence on Earth manifested in multiple, extreme environments, with species adapted to their niches, capable of sophisticated communication and observation. Eleanor began constructing a detailed taxonomy of environmental intelligence, categorizing behaviors, patterns, and interactions by ecological niche and method of communication: visual, vibrational, electromagnetic, and environmental manipulation. She noted the parallels between the oceanic creatures, Amazonian luminescent beings, desert reflectors, and the Yeti. All demonstrated awareness, observation, selective interaction, and ethical constraint, suggesting that life across extremes operated under convergent principles of sentient behavior. During a deep-sea dive in a trench illuminated by bioluminescent plankton, Eleanor witnessed an encounter that would challenge both scientific understanding and philosophical perception. A massive semi-translucent form approached the submersible, emitting a combination of light pulses, harmonic vibrations, and subtle pressure waves in the surrounding water. Eleanor realized that this was not merely a form of navigation or predation, but an intentional engagement, a deliberate attempt to communicate or interact within the perceptual limits of human observation. She adjusted instruments, reflected light, and synchronized movements, and the entity responded instantly, creating a dialogue that unfolded across multiple sensory channels simultaneously. The exchange lasted hours, during which Eleanor felt a profound connection not only with the entity but with the medium itself. The water seemed to pulse with consciousness, currents shifted in response to the interaction, and even surrounding marine life moved in ways that reinforced the entity's intentions. This encounter confirmed her growing conviction that intelligence was not limited to organisms with conventional nervous systems, but could emerge in distributed forms, integrated with environments in ways humans were only beginning to perceive. Eleanor's reflections deepened. The Earth was not merely a collection of ecosystems but a network of sentient observation, each environment fostering unique adaptations in intelligence and communication, each interacting with humans who demonstrated perceptual acuity, ethical restraint, and interpretive skill. Over the subsequent days, additional observations reinforced these principles. Schools of bioluminescent fish moved in synchronized patterns that changed in response to gestures, sonar emissions, or light manipulations. Subtle changes in current, temperature, and salinity appeared to encode information, suggesting a form of environmental literacy among marine species that paralleled the symbolic patterns observed in ice, snow, desert sands, and rainforest canopies. Eleanor realized that the ocean, like other extreme environments, functioned as both a medium and participant in these exchanges, a dynamic platform through which intelligence communicated across spatial, sensory, and temporal scales. The oceanic intelligences exhibited both individual and collective behaviors, adapting to human observation, while maintaining internal coordination that indicated self-awareness, planning, and deliberate interaction. Eleanor's team documented these behaviors exhaustively, noting nuances in pulse frequency, light reflection, depth modulation, and harmonic vibration, all of which suggested multidimensional cognition. The parallels to the Yeti, Amazonian luminescent beings, and desert entities became increasingly clear. Intelligence manifested differently according to environmental constraints but consistently demonstrated observation, selective engagement, and a capacity for complex interaction. Eleanor's theoretical framework expanded to encompass multi-environmental intelligence, planetary networks, and adaptive communication strategies. The oceanic interactions introduced new dimensions: collective cognition among dispersed entities, environmental literacy across fluid dynamics, and multi-channel communication mediated through light, vibration, and pressure. The ethical considerations intensified. Intrusion into oceanic environments could disrupt delicate communication networks, influence behavior, or provoke unintended consequences. Eleanor emphasized careful observation, minimal intervention, and interpretive analysis, recognizing that their presence alone could alter patterns of interaction, and that humanity's understanding of intelligence was still in its infancy. During a late-night dive along a submerged ridge, Eleanor encountered a formation of luminous entities creating patterns that resembled geometric sequences projected onto the water's surface. The sequences evolved in response to human gestures, movement of submersibles, and light modulation, forming a complex dialogue that tested attentional focus, perceptual acuity, and interpretive skill. Eleanor responded using synchronized light pulses and directional movement, noting immediate adjustments in the entity's formations. The exchange demonstrated adaptive intelligence, multimodal communication, and environmental mastery on a scale that rivaled the most sophisticated terrestrial behaviors observed in previous expeditions. Hours later, the entities receded into deeper waters, leaving the team with an acute awareness of the ephemeral nature of interaction, the profound responsibility of observation, and the staggering complexity of life forms operating beyond conventional human perception. Eleanor's reflections deepened into philosophical inquiry. What does it mean for humanity to exist alongside life forms that perceive, manipulate, and interact in ways incomprehensible to our senses? How can ethics, science, and consciousness reconcile with the existence of planetary-scale networks of intelligence? These questions guided the remaining days of exploration, as Eleanor and her team navigated coastal trenches, underwater caves, and deep-sea ridges, each encounter reinforcing the principles observed across deserts, mountains, and forests. Over time, patterns emerged. Intelligence adapts to environmental extremes, engages selectively, communicates multimodally, and often remains concealed until conditions favor perceptive, ethical observation. Eleanor recognized the consistency of these principles as a unifying thread connecting disparate environments, suggesting that life on Earth, far from being anthropocentric, existed as a network of awareness and interaction that challenged conventional science and philosophy. She recorded every pulse, reflection, vibration, and behavioral nuance, constructing a comprehensive framework that integrated terrestrial and marine intelligence into a coherent model. As the oceanic exploration concluded, Eleanor contemplated the journey from Siberia, through the Amazon, deserts, mountains, and now the oceanic extremes, recognizing that each environment had revealed a facet of planetary intelligence, each encounter had expanded the boundaries of perception, and each observation reinforced the ethical imperative to observe without interference. The Yeti, Amazonian luminescent entities, desert intelligences, and oceanic beings formed a planetary mosaic of awareness, a network that functioned beyond conventional comprehension, yet interacted consistently with humans capable of attention, interpretation, and ethical engagement. Eleanor Graves, invigorated by discovery, humbled by the scale of life's intelligence, and acutely aware of the responsibilities inherent in observation, prepared for the next stage of the expedition: subterranean realms, remote caves, and isolated geological formations, each promising new revelations, tests of perception, and the deepening of understanding regarding the extraordinary tapestry of intelligence that coexisted alongside humanity on Earth. The planet was alive in ways previously unimagined, and Eleanor, committed to observing, documenting, and ethically engaging with its many forms of intelligence, stepped forward with curiosity, courage, and reverence, fully aware that every encounter would challenge assumptions, expand consciousness, and redefine humanity's understanding of life, perception, and existence itself. With the oceanic explorations behind them, Eleanor Graves and her team turned their attention to subterranean realms, descending into vast cave systems that had remained untouched by humans for millennia, labyrinths of stone, mineral formations, and hidden rivers that challenged both navigation and comprehension. The transition from surface and aquatic extremes to underground environments revealed a whole new spectrum of intelligence, adaptation, and environmental mastery. Immediately, they noticed subtle anomalies. Air currents shifting without apparent cause, mineral formations rearranged in patterns suggesting deliberate intervention, and faint vibrations resonating through walls and floors that could not be attributed to geological activity alone. Eleanor hypothesized that the caves harbored a form of sentient life adapted to low-light, high-pressure conditions, an intelligence that used tactile, acoustic, and chemical modalities to interact with the environment and potentially with observers. Instruments confirmed anomalies, electromagnetic fluctuations, microvibrations, and chemical traces that shifted in response to human presence, suggesting both awareness and deliberate interaction. On the third day, while exploring a narrow passage lined with stalagmites and stalactites, Eleanor observed faint glimmers that reflected torchlight in precise sequences. The patterns formed geometric shapes that appeared too deliberate to be natural, a potential attempt at communication or symbolic expression. The team paused, observing, recording, and testing the response of the environment to their own subtle gestures, realizing that the cave itself functioned as a medium through which intelligence could manifest and interact with attentive observers. For hours, Eleanor experimented with coordinated gestures, light modulation, and sound pulses, noting immediate responses from the environment. Vibrations intensified in synchrony, mineral surfaces reflected light in corresponding sequences, and faint, almost imperceptible chemical changes occurred. It was a multimodal exchange, a dialogue conducted across modalities beyond conventional human comprehension, yet intelligible to perceptive observers willing to engage ethically and patiently. These encounters reinforced patterns Eleanor had identified across other extreme environments: selective engagement, environmental manipulation, observation prior to interaction, and multimodal communication. Subterranean intelligence, however, introduced novel elements: extreme sensitivity to vibration, precise manipulation of mineral formations, and potential integration of chemical and acoustic signaling into complex information systems. As they ventured deeper, the team encountered shapes in the darkness that seemed semi-solid, semi-energetic, moving with deliberate intent. Some glowed faintly, emitting light patterns synchronized with environmental vibrations, while others interacted with water droplets, air currents, and stone surfaces to create sequences that appeared highly organized. Eleanor theorized that these forms represented a subterranean network of consciousness, capable of influencing the cave's environment, communicating through matter, energy, and perception, and selectively engaging with humans who demonstrated observation, attention, and ethical awareness. Over days, the team recorded interactions that challenged definitions of life: formations that shifted without physical cause, patterns of bioluminescence coupled with microvibrations, and entities that appeared to anticipate human responses before taking action. Eleanor recognized a familiar principle: intelligence often revealed itself in subtle, controlled, and context-sensitive ways, rewarding patience and perceptual acuity, while remaining largely concealed from casual observation. During a particularly intense session in a massive underground chamber, Eleanor observed a coordinated sequence of movement among several entities. They shifted mineral formations, pulsed luminescent signals, and caused water in shallow pools to ripple rhythmically. The sequence responded to Eleanor's gestures, mirroring patterns, adjusting intensity, and conveying apparent intent. Hours passed in this silent dialogue, during which Eleanor felt an almost spiritual connection to the subterranean intelligence, recognizing that communication was not confined to vocalization, symbols, or conventional sensory channels, but extended across environmental modulation, resonance, and perceptual alignment. These encounters, combined with prior experiences in Siberian mountains, the Amazon, deserts, and oceans, reinforced Eleanor's planetary intelligence hypothesis. Life adapted to extreme conditions developed sophisticated observation and communication mechanisms, tailored to the environment, human perception, and ethical engagement. Each environment, while unique, exhibited convergent principles: selective engagement, environmental mastery, multimodal interaction, and a capacity to observe, respond, and potentially teach. Eleanor documented every detail, from vibrational sequences to mineral arrangements, from luminescent modulation to chemical signals, developing a framework to compare, analyze, and theorize across environmental contexts. The team also noticed that subterranean intelligence appeared aware of cumulative human experience. Entities responded differently than at initial entry, suggesting memory, learning, or recognition of prior interaction patterns. Eleanor hypothesized that intelligence, distributed across extreme environments, might be interconnected, sharing awareness across niches, each node capable of both localized and planetary-level observation. Ethical concerns became even more pressing. The potential impact of human presence on these sensitive systems could alter behaviors, communication patterns, or even threaten the persistence of hidden intelligences. Eleanor emphasized observation without interference, careful documentation, and calibration of human actions to minimize disruption. Over the following week, the subterranean network revealed even greater sophistication. entities manipulated airflow to create sound sequences resembling harmonic communication, redirected light in precise patterns, and adjusted micro-vibrations in the cave walls to encode rhythmic information. These behaviors demonstrated not only awareness and adaptation but also foresight, as responses often anticipated human gestures, suggesting cognitive processes that integrated observation, environmental understanding, and predictive capability. Eleanor reflected on parallels across environments: Siberian Yeti, Amazonian luminescent beings, desert entities, oceanic intelligences, and now subterranean life forms all exhibited the same core principles. What varied was medium-specific adaptation: terrestrial strength and stealth for Yeti, light and resonance in the Amazon, reflection and current manipulation in deserts, fluid, multidimensional signaling in oceans, and vibration chemicoluminescence in caves. Together, they formed a planetary pattern of life optimized for observation, interaction, and survival in extreme conditions. Late one night, deep in a limestone cavern, Eleanor observed a remarkable sequence. Multiple entities converged to create a dynamic display of coordinated light, vibration, and water movement. Patterns shifted in response to her gestures, then advanced independently, displaying forms of creativity and adaptation that suggested intelligence beyond simple survival mechanisms. Eleanor realized that these subterranean forms were not merely reactive, but could initiate interaction, explore new possibilities, and respond ethically to observers. The implications were staggering. Intelligence on Earth operated in dimensions, modalities, and scales far beyond conventional human comprehension, distributed across environments, species, and ecological niches. Eleanor recorded the experience meticulously, noting the multimodal sequences, environmental manipulations, and apparent cognitive processes at work. She began to synthesize observations into a unifying framework. Life and intelligence evolved to utilize every accessible medium, adapted to extreme conditions, and engaged selectively with observers capable of perceiving and respecting their presence. The subterranean encounters, in particular, highlighted resilience, complexity, and adaptive communication strategies, emphasizing the ethical imperative for humans to observe responsibly, interpret carefully, and minimize interference. Eleanor Graves understood that these experiences were not isolated phenomena, but nodes in a planetary network of intelligence, each environment contributing to a larger, interconnected understanding of consciousness, observation, and multimodal interaction. As the team prepared to exit the cave system, Eleanor reflected on the cumulative journey. Siberian ice, Amazon rainforest, deserts, mountains, oceans, and now subterranean realms had revealed a tapestry of intelligence operating across modalities, environments, and scales. Each encounter confirmed the principles she had hypothesized: selective engagement, environmental mastery, multimodal communication, ethical observation, and adaptation to extreme conditions. Eleanor's understanding of life, perception, and human responsibility had been fundamentally transformed. She was now prepared to extend the expedition into uncharted environments, polar depths, volcanic zones, and isolated geological formations, each promising new forms of interaction, observation, and ethical engagement. The Earth was alive with intelligence far beyond human comprehension, and Eleanor, embracing both curiosity and humility, was determined to observe, document, and ethically engage with these extraordinary forms of life, each encounter deepening humanity's understanding of existence, consciousness, and the extraordinary, hidden networks of awareness that shared their planet. As Eleanor Graves and her team emerged from the subterranean networks and prepared to explore volcanic zones, the anticipation of encountering life adapted to heat, pressure, and toxic gases infused every aspect of their planning with both excitement and caution. Volcanic regions, unlike the serene expanses of the ocean or the quiet resilience of mountain peaks, presented an ever-present threat of sudden eruptions, shifting terrain, and the constant presence of noxious gases, yet they also promised the possibility of encountering life forms whose intelligence had evolved in symbiosis with these extreme, unstable conditions. From the first steps on cooled lava fields, Eleanor observed subtle anomalies: patterns in the cracked basalt that suggested deliberate shaping, faint thermal pulses detectable only through specialized instruments, and small plumes of gas that rose in rhythmic sequences inconsistent with natural venting. The team proceeded with meticulous care, aware that any misstep could destroy fragile traces of intelligent behavior or provoke a response from life forms adapted to the volatile environment. On the second day, as they navigated a narrow fissure lined with glowing mineral deposits, Eleanor noticed a sequence of movements in the ambient thermal currents, patterns of rising and falling heat that suggested deliberate manipulation. Instruments confirmed slight electromagnetic fluctuations synchronized with thermal pulses, indicating an intelligent, energy-based interaction with the environment. The team realized that these volcanic entities, though unlike any terrestrial or marine species previously encountered, were clearly sentient, employing environmental manipulation, energy modulation, and selective visibility to communicate and interact with perceptive observers. Over the next several days, Eleanor documented a series of encounters that challenged conventional notions of life. Molten streams redirected into flowing shapes that resembled purposeful architecture, glowing mineral formations that pulsed rhythmically in response to human gestures, and thermal eddies that moved in precise patterns, creating a dynamic dialogue between the environment and the observers. She theorized that these entities had evolved to integrate with the extreme conditions of volcanic activity, using heat, pressure, and mineral presence as multimodal communication channels. The behaviors were deliberate, consistent, and adaptive, indicating both individual intelligence and collective coordination across the volcanic terrain. Eleanor recognized familiar principles emerging: selective engagement, environmental mastery, multimodal interaction, observation before action, and ethical consideration of human presence. Yet volcanic life introduced additional layers: manipulation of energy flows, adaptation to rapidly changing terrain, and utilization of chemical and thermal properties to encode messages or monitor observers. One particularly striking encounter occurred when a lava tube emitted a series of synchronized thermal pulses, while small incandescent entities moved across the cooled rock surface, arranging fragments into intricate geometric shapes. Eleanor responded with controlled gestures, synchronized heat projection from instruments, and reflective surfaces to create light sequences. The entities immediately adjusted their formations, intensifying pulses and creating a dynamic, interactive display that unfolded across the cavern, effectively forming a conversation through environmental modulation and energy signaling. Hours passed in this exchange, each participant observing, responding, and adapting with an awareness that transcended conventional understanding of life or communication. Eleanor felt a profound connection to the intelligence she was witnessing, recognizing both the similarities and contrasts with previous encounters. The Yeti's subtle environmental manipulation, Amazonian luminescence, desert reflection and current modulation, oceanic harmonic coordination, and subterranean vibration luminescence. Sequences all converged in principle, yet volcanic intelligence added a dimension of energy-based interaction. The team continued to study the behavior of these volcanic entities, noting that even minor disturbances, shifts in temperature, or misaligned gestures could alter responses, emphasizing the importance of ethical, deliberate, and attentive observation. Eleanor theorized that the apparent intelligence represented not only adaptation to extreme conditions, but also a form of environmental literacy that permitted communication and interaction with observers capable of perceiving subtle cues. The volcanic encounters further solidified Eleanor's concept of a planetary network of intelligence, a system in which life forms adapted to extreme environments employed diverse modalities: visual, auditory, chemical, thermal, and energy-based, to interact, observe, and engage selectively with humans and potentially with each other. Over time, she began to recognize patterns in interaction: initial observation, testing of human perception, cautious engagement, and progressive deepening of communication depending on the attentiveness, ethical conduct, and interpretive skill of the observers. The volcanic entities exhibited both individual decision-making and collective coordination, suggesting a distributed cognition network capable of memory, learning, and environmental manipulation to achieve communication or adaptive goals. Eleanor's notes expanded rapidly, detailing sequences of heat pulses, reflective gestures, chemical emission patterns, mineral movement, and energy modulation. She compared these to previous observations, identifying core principles across extremes: selective engagement, environmental mastery, multimodal communication, adaptation to niche conditions, and ethical observation. One evening, near a slowly flowing lava stream, Eleanor observed a remarkable interaction. Entities formed patterns in molten rock, synchronized pulses with ambient heat, and projected luminescent flashes in rhythm with minor seismic tremors. Eleanor mirrored these patterns using instruments, controlled reflection, and gesture sequences. The entities responded immediately, creating increasingly complex interactions, exhibiting creativity, problem-solving, and adaptive intelligence. The display continued for hours, leaving Eleanor and her team exhilarated, awestruck, and deeply conscious of the fragility and profundity of these exchanges. She recognized that volcanic life, like other extreme environment intelligences, existed both as a functional adaptation and as an active, perceiving intelligence capable of observation, interaction, and selective communication. The implications for science, philosophy, and human understanding of life were profound. Intelligence was not an isolated phenomenon, but a distributed property manifesting in forms adapted to environmental extremes, capable of communication across multiple channels, and observable only through careful, ethical, and perceptive engagement. Eleanor reflected on the cumulative journey: Siberian Yeti, Amazonian luminescent beings, desert entities, oceanic intelligences, subterranean forms, and now volcanic life. All exhibited convergent principles of awareness, observation, and communication, yet each environment contributed unique modalities adapted to its conditions. This reinforced her hypothesis of a planetary network of sentient systems, each node observing, interacting, and maintaining environmental balance, engaging selectively with perceptive human observers. As the volcanic exploration concluded, Eleanor and her team recognized the necessity of continued research, careful documentation, and ethical reflection. Their presence could influence these intelligent systems, alter patterns of behavior, and impact the delicate equilibrium of extreme environments. Eleanor understood that their discoveries would challenge not only scientific understanding, but also philosophical and ethical frameworks, expanding the definition of life, consciousness, and interspecies communication. She meticulously compiled notes, cross-referenced environmental and behavioral data, and developed conceptual models to explain the interactions, adaptations, and intelligence observed. The Yeti, Amazonian luminescent beings, desert entities, oceanic life forms, subterranean intelligences, and volcanic entities together illustrated the vast spectrum of adaptation, environmental mastery, and multimodal communication. Eleanor Graves, driven by curiosity, humility, and a deep commitment to understanding, prepared for the final phase of the expedition: polar regions and extreme ice environments, where life might exhibit principles similar to the Yeti yet adapted to isolation, cold, and seasonal scarcity, potentially revealing new modalities of perception, interaction, and planetary intelligence. The Earth, she realized, was not merely inhabited by human-centric life, but teeming with sentient systems, each adapted to its niche, each observing and interacting selectively, forming a planetary mosaic of awareness, interaction, and consciousness that challenged assumptions, expanded perception, and demanded ethical engagement. Eleanor felt both exhilaration and responsibility, knowing that the journey into the polar extremes would push human perception, endurance, and understanding to its limits, yet offered the promise of unprecedented insight into the extraordinary, hidden networks of intelligence that shared the planet with humanity. The final leg of Eleanor Graves' expedition took her and her team to the polar extremes, regions of ice, snow, and frozen silence where survival depended on endurance, ingenuity, and an intimate understanding of an unforgiving environment. Yet these frozen expanses also promised encounters with intelligence that had evolved under relentless cold, seasonal darkness, and isolation, perhaps preserving principles observed in the Yeti, while adapting to the unique pressures of the polar world. From the first steps on the snow-crusted tundra, anomalies emerged. Subtle depressions in the ice that suggested deliberate creation, minor temperature fluctuations inconsistent with the sun's trajectory, and the faintest vibrations traveling through glaciers that could not be explained by natural phenomena alone. Eleanor, with her team, immediately recognized the familiar pattern: an environment-sensitive intelligence that observed before engaging, manipulated surroundings in precise ways, and communicated through multimodal signals perceptible only to those attuned to subtle environmental cues. On the second day, while ascending a glacial ridge, the team observed a series of footprints partially concealed by drifting snow, their size enormous yet their weight distribution irregular, suggesting adaptation to icy terrain and the deliberate concealment or modulation of presence. Eleanor noted parallels with prior encounters: the Yeti's stealth in Siberia, Amazonian luminescent modulation, desert reflection patterns, oceanic harmonic displays, subterranean vibration luminescence communication, and volcanic energy signaling all reflected principles of environmental mastery, selective engagement, and multimodal intelligence, yet the polar entities added extreme endurance, concealment, and energy-efficient signaling as adaptations to their frozen domain. As they progressed deeper into the glacial expanse, Eleanor observed faint, rhythmic glimmers along the horizon, light reflecting off ice crystals in patterns that suggested intentional sequences rather than chance reflection. Instruments confirmed slight electromagnetic and vibrational fluctuations synchronized with the visual patterns, signaling intelligent environmental manipulation. The team cautiously responded with controlled gestures, light modulation, and synchronized movement, eliciting immediate adjustments in the glimmering sequences that demonstrated observation, adaptation, and interaction. Over subsequent days, Eleanor documented a series of encounters that revealed extraordinary complexity: entities that moved with fluid precision across ice, creating geometric arrangements of snow and ice fragments, bioluminescent flashes embedded within the ice itself, and subtle vibrational pulses that echoed across frozen valleys, forming a sophisticated, multimodal dialogue capable of communicating intent, attention, and even curiosity. The polar intelligences exhibited collective behaviors reminiscent of previous extreme environment life forms: coordinated movement, synchronization with environmental phenomena, selective engagement, and the capacity to anticipate human gestures. Yet their adaptations were unique: reliance on minimal energy expenditure, extreme concealment, exploitation of seasonal light cycles, and utilization of ice as both medium and amplifier for communication. Eleanor realized that these entities, like others she had encountered, were not only observing humans but actively teaching, testing perceptual acuity, and guiding ethical engagement. Hours of interaction culminated in a breathtaking display. A massive formation of ice crystals shifted and reflected light, pulses of harmonic vibrations resonated through the frozen ground, and bioluminescent flashes aligned with subtle atmospheric changes to create a complex, dynamic, and intentional communication network. Eleanor and her team responded with synchronized reflection, movement, and modulation of light and instruments, establishing a dialogue that spanned visual, auditory, tactile, and environmental channels simultaneously. The exchange revealed intelligence capable of abstraction, adaptation, and predictive response, reinforcing her hypothesis that life on Earth operated as a multidimensional, planetary network, with each extreme environment fostering unique adaptations of cognition, communication, and interaction. Eleanor's reflections extended beyond immediate observation. The polar entities like the Yeti, Amazonian luminescent beings, desert reflectors, oceanic intelligences, subterranean networks, and volcanic life forms collectively demonstrated the universality of intelligence's principles: selective engagement, environmental mastery, multimodal communication, observation prior to action, ethical interaction, and adaptation to extreme conditions. She synthesized her findings into a comprehensive framework, noting that planetary intelligence was distributed, modular, and specialized, with nodes of awareness evolving to meet the constraints of each ecological niche, while maintaining the capacity for cross-environmental interaction with perceptive human observers. As the expedition progressed, Eleanor observed polar behaviors that were simultaneously pragmatic and abstract: the creation of ice sculptures that appeared symbolic, rhythmic vibrational pulses that encoded sequential information, and temperature-modulated airflow patterns that mirrored human gestures and adapted dynamically. These patterns, she realized, were intentional, forming a sophisticated environmental language designed to test, teach, and interact without violating ethical boundaries or compromising the safety of observers. During the final night of the polar exploration, under the dancing aurora, Eleanor observed a culmination of multi-environmental intelligence in action. Distant ice formations pulsed in coordination with auroral light, thermal differentials created harmonic resonances in the frozen ground, and bioluminescent microorganisms glimmered in patterns that reflected environmental and human activity. The synchronized, multimodal display conveyed not only observation but recognition, curiosity, and engagement, forming a dialogue that spanned visual, auditory, vibrational, and environmental modalities. Eleanor understood that she was witnessing the pinnacle of a planetary intelligence network, one that had evolved over millennia across deserts, mountains, oceans, rainforests, caves, volcanic zones, and polar extremes. Each extreme fostered specific adaptations, yet the underlying principles remained consistent: observation, selective engagement, environmental mastery, ethical interaction, and multimodal communication. Eleanor documented every detail meticulously, aware that the patterns, sequences, and behaviors observed represented a level of cognition and interaction far beyond conventional human understanding. She recognized that humanity's role was both privileged and fragile, capable of perceiving and learning, yet at risk of disrupting these intricate networks through misunderstanding, interference, or neglect of ethical responsibility. As the polar exploration concluded, Eleanor reflected on the cumulative journey, from Siberian Yeti to Amazonian luminescent entities, from desert reflectors to oceanic harmonics, from subterranean vibrational intelligence to volcanic energy forms, and finally to polar extremes. A coherent planetary-scale pattern of intelligence had emerged. Each environment contributed unique modalities, each node observed and responded selectively, and each interaction demonstrated principles of cognition, adaptation, and ethical engagement. Eleanor understood that this discovery fundamentally altered humanity's perception of life, consciousness, and the interconnectedness of ecosystems across Earth. The planet itself was alive with intelligence, awareness, and capacity for interaction, existing in forms and modalities that humans were only beginning to perceive and understand. She felt profound humility, gratitude, and exhilaration, recognizing that every encounter had reshaped assumptions, expanded perception, and demanded ethical responsibility. Eleanor Graves, having traversed continents, climates, and extremes, comprehended the vastness of intelligence on Earth, its intricate patterns, and the ethical imperative of careful observation, documentation, and engagement. As she gazed across the frozen expanse, watching subtle pulses of light, vibration, and movement respond to her presence, she understood that humanity's journey had only just begun. The Earth was a dynamic network of awareness, each extreme environment a node in a planetary system of cognition, and every observer capable of learning, interacting, and contributing to the understanding of life beyond conventional perception. With this realization, Eleanor prepared to compile the findings, synthesize the observations, and share a new vision of Earth, a world alive not merely in biological terms but in intelligence, consciousness, and adaptive multimodal interaction, where the Yeti of Siberia, Amazonian luminescent beings, desert entities, oceanic intelligences, subterranean networks, volcanic life, and polar forms all existed in a coherent planetary tapestry, a mosaic of perception, awareness, and selective engagement waiting for humanity to recognize, respect, and ethically participate in the extraordinary network of life that transcended traditional definitions and expanded the horizon of consciousness, perception, and responsibility for all who shared the planet.